Chapter 1481. Slurp. It had been a long time since he had eaten sweet and sour ribs, so the Lord Go was enjoying it. It was a taste he remembered. The dog had been wandering in the relic for a long time, and sometimes he missed the time when they were together. Lord Dog's tail kept wagging. It wagged to the left, wagged to the right, his butt was in the air, and his head was pressed against the blue and white porcelain bowl as he ate happily. Eating sweet and sour ribs was the purest joy. Rumble. Everything in the sky was changing colors. In the distance, Xiachen finally seized the opportunity. While the imperial concubine's attention was on the Lord Go, she made her move. She was not a merciful person. She released the law of space. Instantly the void cracked inch by inch. The imperial concubine's expression flickered. She found that her surroundings seemed to have turned into a Rubik's Cube, which enveloped her. Every line in the Rubik's Cube was like the sharpest blade, about to cut the imperial concubine in half. At this moment, Summer showed no mercy. She used a divine ability. Spatial slash. This was a divine ability of the law of space that she had comprehended. Every existence who comprehended the supreme law of the universe could comprehend divine abilities after reaching the level of a god, which would be their most powerful offensive means. Even though the imperial concubine had the heavenly phoenix plume, she could not withstand the attack of this divine ability. If Black and White were here, they might be able to break Summer's attack with some powerful means. However, at this moment, Black and White were fully focused on dealing with the black dog. In fact, Black and White had their eyes on the heaven god's bone. If they could seize it and extract the heaven god's substance from it, their strength would also be greatly improved. They could even break through to become high-grade god kings. The imperial concubine howled miserably. Her skin was cut by the spatial slash, and beads of blood kept oozing out of it, about to drip to the ground. Her hair was cut off and scattered, her phoenix coronet was broken, and her skin was torn. She looked very miserable. The imperial concubine no longer looked as graceful and elegant as before. "Help me!" There was fear in the imperial concubine's eyes. She wanted to use her heavenly phoenix plume to block this divine art, but she realized that her spiritual connection with the heavenly phoenix plume had been severed. Xiachen was very vigilant, cutting off her connection with the heavenly phoenix plume. She didn't have the slightest chance to activate the heavenly phoenix plume, and without it, she wouldn't be able to defeat Xiachen. Pucci! The imperial concubine's body trembled. Inside the phoenix chariot, the crown prince's pupils constricted. "No!" The crown prince opened his mouth and said in pain. However, Xiachen was not moved in the slightest. His eyes were still flickering with coldness. Even though her face was blurry and couldn't be seen clearly, at this moment, she didn't even need to look to know that Xiachen's expression was definitely very serious. "Save me!" The imperial concubine was terrified. She could feel the killing intent of the summer. "You can't kill me. I am the imperial concubine. I'm the imperial concubine, appointed by the emperor god. If you kill me, the divine emperor will not forgive you." The imperial concubine's heart trembled. Her body kept shaking, but she didn't dare to shake too much, because she was afraid that her body would be completely cut into pieces. She couldn't accept such an ugly way to die. The eunuchs and maids around the phoenix chariot all went crazy. They rushed over, intending to do something. "Get lost." Xiachen's eyes were extremely cold. Blood slowly trickled down the corner of her mouth. Forcibly cutting off the connection between the heavenly phoenix plume and the imperial concubine was also a big burden for her. Her eyes were fierce as she glanced coldly at the eunuchs and maids. Swish! The spatial slash suddenly moved horizontally. The maids and eunuchs were all cut in half in midair. Pucci! Her body was separated and smashed into the void. The imperial concubine trembled. Xiachen was crazy. How could she really kill her? In the distance, Black and White struggled inwardly. However, between the imperial concubine and the heaven god's bone, after weighing the pros and cons, They chose the heaven god's bone. The imperial concubine was gone. They could cultivate and support her again, but the opportunity to obtain the heaven god's bone was right in front of them. If they let this dog return to the relic, it would be difficult for them to get the heaven god's bone again. Therefore, they gave up on the imperial concubine. Poochie! The imperial concubine screamed. She looked at Black and White, who were leaving. She knew that she had been abandoned. This caused her to feel extremely indignant and furious. These old guys are all such bastards. No. Xia-Chen, no. I'm the Divine Emperor's concubine, and the Divine Emperor is your brother. The imperial concubine's eyes showed a pleading look. Xia-Chen sneered and shook her head. How could she spare this woman die? Xia-Chen bit her lower lip, causing blood to spurt out. She raised her arm, which seemed to have blood marks on it. Then, she swung it hard. The imperial concubine's screams suddenly became more miserable. Poochie! A network of blood marks appeared on the imperial concubine's body. All of a sudden, Xia-Chen froze. Enough. An incomparably powerful aura spread out. Xia-Chen was stunned. She only felt a supreme force suddenly bombarding her. In an instant, it erased Xia-Chen's spatial slash. Under that force, Xia-Chen's spatial slash was like a piece of paper. Swish! The imperial concubine, who was on the verge of death, was finally freed. She regained control of the heavenly phoenix plume. His eyes were filled with boundless ferocity. She stared at Xia-Chen. You bitch! You want to kill me? How dare you kill me? The imperial concubine's murderous intent exploded. The heavenly phoenix plume controlled it. 9 phoenix feathers floated around her body, piercing towards Xia-Xia. Xia-Chen stood in the void. She stared blankly at the palace. Did he really save this woman? Was he crazy? Xia-Chen hovered in the void. The blur on her face slowly faded, revealing a beautiful face that could topple cities and countries. She looked a little tired, but that look, if Bu Fong saw it, he would be terrified. Because Xia-Chen's appearance was 70 to 80% similar to Mu Hongxi's. The phoenix feathers approached at high speed, almost piercing through Xia-Chen in a flash. Once pierced, Xia-Chen would die. Xia-Chen felt a little disappointed. Her face was sad and moving. Boom! All of a sudden, those phoenix feathers stopped. They hovered in the void. A terrifying aura burst out from the palace, as if it had moved the void. Bitch! How dare you! Her furious roar shook heaven and earth. The horrible voice rang out incessantly. The imperial concubine's ferocious face twitched. 9 dragon roars rang out. In the direction of the palace, a beam of golden light soared into the sky, and the rumble of a chariot crushed everything. With a creaking sound, the void exploded. Rumble! The 9 dragons soared into the sky. 9 5-clawed golden dragons circled in the sky, pulling the chariot across the vast sky. A majestic aura suddenly pervaded the sky. At this moment, the whole capital of the divine dynasty was shrouded in majesty. Everyone revealed a look of shock. Whether it was the heads of aristocratic families or the common people, they all knelt on the ground, put their palms on their foreheads and knelt. They were respectful and fanatical. The divine emperor of the Xiui divine dynasty had finally appeared. The imperial concubine dared not move. The word bitch made her freeze on the spot. A clanging sound rang out. The chariot approached with a rumble. 9 golden divine dragons flew across the sky, hovering in midair and exuding supreme pressure. The chariot was golden and covered with patterns. A towering figure stood on the chariot. It was a man in a dragon robe. He wore a golden dragon robe and a dragon crown on his head. His hair was white, and although he was old, he was full of spirit. His eyes seemed to be able to see through the void. The divine emperor! The divine emperor! The heads of the aristocratic families knelt in midair and cried silently in their hearts. How many years had it been? The divine emperor finally appeared again, that supreme pressure, that aura that could suppress everything. and it was that invincible man. Although the divine emperor was old, his aura was as strong as ever. The dragon roars rang out. The imperial concubine shivered. The divine emperor had really come out of seclusion. No matter how presumptuous she was, she did not dare to be presumptuous in front of the divine emperor. The pressure this man gave her was too terrible. Moreover, when the divine emperor called her a bitch just now, she did not dare to move. The connection between her and the heavenly phoenix plume was completely cut off. The divine emperor walked out of the chariot step by step. Summer looked at the divine emperor with a complicated look in her eyes and sighed. The divine emperor, Xiaoyuhe, was a supreme existence who shook the chaotic universe. They were the divine emperors of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, the Titan divine dynasty, and the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. The three divine emperors suppressed heaven and earth. They were the strongest experts under the heaven gods. The appearance of each of them was enough to shake heaven and earth. The divine emperor appeared in front of the imperial concubine. The imperial concubine watched in fear. Your Majesty," she said, trembling. The divine emperor put his hands behind his back and looked indifferently at her. Slap. Suddenly, the divine emperor raised his hand and slapped the imperial concubine. The imperial concubine was stunned by the slap. "Who gave you the courage to attack Summer? Don't you know? Xia is this emperor's younger sister, this emperor's only relative? Is she a member of the imperial family who shares the same blood of the Xia clan as me?" The imperial concubine covered her face with her hands, her eyes wide with horror. The divine emperor actually hit her? Was he crazy? That damn old man. The old man whose time was almost up. How dare he hit her? In the distance, Black and White's attacks had already fallen. A terrible bombardment engulfed that part of the world. The rib-eating dog, Little Hu, and Bu Fong were all engulfed by the sword energy. The divine emperor's appearance made Black and White nervous. The divine emperor's power was too strong. Even though the divine emperor had entered his final years and was on the verge of a great calamity, they still did not dare to be presumptuous. The divine emperor has appeared. The Black and White elders looked at each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. Take the heaven god's bone and enter the relic quickly. The divine emperor has reappeared. He will certainly eliminate all the troubles in the divine dynasty's capital before his time comes. They looked at each other, exchanged glances, and nodded. Then, his figure suddenly fell to the ground. They wanted to take the dog's heaven god's bone from the sea of sword energy. Suddenly Black and White froze. As they fell, they suddenly found that in the sea of sword energy, there was a vortex. In that vortex Bu Fong, Little Hu, and the Lord Go were all standing peacefully. The fat black dog was gobbling up a porcelain plate. It jerked its head up. There were still a few pieces of sweet and sour ribs left on the plate. The black dog's mouth was covered with grease. Boom. How dare you disturb the Lord Go's meal? Are you courting death? The fat black dog raised its head, its eyes bursting with endless ferocity. The next moment, looking up, the Lord Go let out an earth-shattering bark. The dog's bark was deafening. It even attracted the divine emperor's attention in the distance. Boom! The heaven god's bone, which was as white as jade, was caught by the Lord Go. As the Lord Go roared, his figure disappeared in a flash. The law of time spread. Black and White felt that everything around them had come to a standstill, as if they had sunk into a swamp. Then, under their incredulous gazes, an exquisite dog paw enlarged in front of their eyes. It pressed hard on their faces. The two of them were pressed to the ground. With a boom, an explosion rang out. The gravel on the ground slowly splashed in all directions. As for the black dog, it grabbed the heaven god's bone and smashed it at them. Bam! 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 Elder Black and Elder White trembled in fear. This was because they were horrified to see that their bodies were slowly crumbling under the black dog's slow-motion attack. The feeling of watching their bodies crumble, it was so creepy. Time seemed to stand still. In the distance, the old divine emperor clasped his hands behind his back and turned his head slightly. It seemed that he was not restricted by the law of time. His eyes fell on the Lord Go. The Lord Go raised his head and grinned at the divine emperor. Then, he bared his white, canine teeth. They were still stained with the residue of the sweet and sour ribs. Chapter 1482. That piece of minced meat was very conspicuous under Lord Dog's pearly white teeth. The law of time floated around them, and time became very slow, flowing quietly like water. Everything was still, and even the broken pieces on the ground were slowly splashing in the air. Boom! The flow of time returned to normal. The ground exploded with a loud bang and suddenly cracked open. Everyone in the surroundings sucked in a breath of cold air. Their eyes widened in disbelief. What had just happened? Why did they feel their hearts palpitate at that moment? Boom! An explosion rang out. The ground in the distance burst apart. Then, under everyone's watchful eyes, the ground cracked. Black and white elders' broken bodies flew out and smashed onto the ground like mud. Their chests caved in deeply, and many of their bones were broken. This, in just an instant, Black and White were defeated. The law of time, Black and White's eyes were full of horror. They took a deep breath and couldn't believe it. If the Crown Prince had comprehended the supreme law of the universe, it would make sense. But a dog, a fat black dog, had comprehended the law of time. This was kind of King funny. Were the supreme laws of the universe so easy to comprehend now? Even a dog could comprehend such a profound law? Or were humans inferior to dogs? Among the supreme laws of the universe, the law of time was second only to the law of transmigration. It was equally profound and difficult to comprehend. Black and White got up from the ground. They no longer looked cold and arrogant. Old Hay let out a miserable howl. Half of his body was smashed away. Moreover, it would be very difficult for him to recover after being smashed by the heaven god's bone. When the two of them joined forces, they could fight a high-grade god king, but what happened in the end? Faced with a dog, they were instantly killed. You can do anything, but you can't disturb Lord Go while I'm eating. This is anger. You can't bear it, Lord Go said coldly. His fat jiggled. He gently tapped the ground with his paw. Then, time stopped again. The divine power of the law of time was released. Elder Black and Elder White froze again. What could they do in the face of the law of time? Bang! Elder Hay's eyes swiveled, revealing a look of horror once again. It was because he discovered that heavenly deity's bones suddenly smashed down, smashing onto his head. His vision gradually turned pitch black. Slowly, he saw his own head exploding. Furthermore, a terrifying suction force was unleashed from the heavenly god bone. Old Hay couldn't even let out a cry before his divine soul was sucked into the heavenly god bone. Why am I always the one getting hurt? Elder Black wailed in his heart. Bam! Time instantly returned to normal. Black's head exploded in front of everyone's eyes. Hay, who was close to the level of a high-grade god king, was beaten to death by a dog with a bone. Master By coughed up blood and his face was filled with fear. His wrinkled face was trembling. He had seen Elder Hay being crushed to death with his own eyes. In order not to follow in his footsteps, Master By felt that he had to run away. What heavenly god bone? What heavenly god blood fox? Without life, everything was just empty talk. This dog was simply like an emissary from hell, rushing for lives. After killing Hay, Lord Go once again put the heavenly god bone back on his back. After wagging his tail, he walked gracefully back to Bufang's side, buried his head in the porcelain plate, and began to eat again. Munch, munch. It was impossible to tell that this was a ferocious monster who had killed a high-grade god king with just 2 bones. The heads of the aristocratic families felt a chill run down their spines. Elder Hay's fate made them feel terrified. Suddenly, they felt a little lucky that they hadn't gone crazy because of the heavenly god bone. Otherwise, they would be the ones being beaten to death by the bone. If they were killed by the bone, they wouldn't even be able to escape with their divine senses. The heavenly god bone could devour divine senses. At that time, they would really die without a whole corpse. Bufang looked at Lord Go, who was eating heartily, and felt a little sorry. That was an existence close to the level of a high-grade god-king. He had comprehended nearly 500 laws. If his divine flame could devour them, it would reach at least 500 laws. At that time, even Bufang wasn't sure how strong it would be. In fact, the power of the divine flame was directly proportional to Bufang's strength. Although the divine flame was strong now, it hadn't undergone a qualitative change. Once Bufang truly comprehended all the laws and became a god, the divine flame that had devoured so many laws would erupt completely. Its power would also reach a terrifying level. Therefore, Bufang's cultivation of the divine flame was, in fact, a process of nurturing. The imperial concubine was dumbstruck. She covered her face with her hands, for the divine emperor had slapped her. She was still a little confused. But what really confused her was Hei's death. Hei was the trump card of the Mo family. The Mo family was her family, the real capital that allowed her to stand tall in the divine dynasty. However, Hei was smashed to death by a dog. Hei and Hei complemented each other. When they joined forces, they could fight a high-grade god-king because the cultivation techniques they cultivated and the laws they comprehended complemented each other. However, once one of them died, only Hei was left, and he could not reach the level of a high-grade god-king. The imperial concubine's status in the divine dynasty would plummet. The head of the Mo family was dead, and Hei were crippled. What else could the imperial concubine rely on? In the past, the divine emperor indulged her so much because he was in seclusion and had no time to deal with trivial matters. With the heavenly phoenix plume, she could be considered the supreme ruler of the divine dynasty. Now that the divine emperor had come out of seclusion, she could no longer be arrogant. The only person she could rely on was the crown prince. The imperial concubine was not stupid. She now understood that she could only keep a low profile. Otherwise, once the divine emperor blamed her, she would definitely die. The divine emperor just didn't want to interfere with what she had done over the years, but it didn't mean he didn't know. The divine emperor was the emperor of a dynasty who ruled many great worlds. If he hadn't grown old and was about to face a great calamity, she wouldn't have dared to be so presumptuous. Your Majesty, I was wrong. The imperial concubine's eyes were filled with tears. Her beautiful face was paired with her lovely posture. Her beautiful face and lovely posture made her look pitiful. Summer just watched with a cold smile. She didn't understand why the divine emperor had stopped her from killing this bitch, and she didn't bother to understand. Shut up. The divine emperor clasped his hands behind his back and said indifferently. His aura spread, looking extremely magnificent and powerful. The imperial concubine shivered. The divine emperor's eyes were extremely cold. Just a glance from him made her feel as if her heart had fallen into an ice cave. The imperial concubine opened her mouth. The divine emperor raised his hand, and the imperial concubine immediately felt that the world around her was sealed. Black armor, gold armor. Capture this woman and put her in prison, the divine emperor said indifferently. After that, he ignored the imperial concubine. This woman was like an ant in his eyes. She was just a spouse he had found at random over the years. She was nothing at all. Even though he was in his twilight years, he was still the ruler of the Xiai divine dynasty. A mere Mo family, a mere woman. What did she matter to him? Father, the crown prince looked respectfully at the divine emperor in midair. Naturally, the crown prince was very respectful to the divine emperor whose might shook the 9 heavens. The void cracked open. Black armor, wrapped in black armor, slowly walked out. Gold armor stepped out as well. The imperial concubine's hair was disheveled, and her face was full of resentment. Once she was put in prison, she knew that she had no way to live. So, she had to struggle. Emo Xiaoji. I'm sorry. Black Armor said indifferently, looking at the disheveled and crazy imperial concubine. You can't arrest me. I'm the imperial concubine. I'm the mother of the nation. The imperial concubine struggled. Her face was full of madness. Imperial concubine, please behave yourself. I'm not Silver Armor. Black Armor said indifferently. He flung his hand away from the imperial concubine's grip on his armor. Then, he flicked his finger. Boom! The black chain, emitting a cold mist, spread out and wrapped around the imperial concubine with a clanging sound. The imperial concubine's eyes were full of despair. Slowly she froze. Crack! The imperial concubine remained motionless. After bowing to the divine emperor, Black Armor pulled the imperial concubine and soared into the sky. Everyone kept quiet out of fear. The imperial concubine's fate made them hold their breath. They knew that the situation in the divine dynasty was about to change. The imperial concubine's faction had completely collapsed. Because of a chef, because of a dog, the imperial concubine's power had collapsed. The entire divine dynasty was about to change. The crown prince's face was full of hesitation. The imperial concubine was his mother, so he could not remain indifferent. Your talent is not bad. Don't waste it. Cultivate hard, and only then will you have a chance to touch the path of a heaven god. The divine emperor glanced at the crown prince. You must break the demon in your heart. It's the rule to admit defeat when you bet. From today on, you are a waiter in that restaurant. Your identity doesn't mean everything. You just need to have the right attitude. The divine emperor looked at the crown prince and said. The crown prince was terrified. Since he was born, this was the first time the divine emperor had spoken so much to him, and he was flattered. Although the divine emperor was his father, he had never seen him once in 100 years. Yes, I will obey father's teachings. The crown prince bowed and said seriously. The divine emperor smiled gently. He was very satisfied with this son of his. He had comprehended 2 supreme laws of the universe, and he had the demeanor of his youth. Next, it would be the dog and the chef. The matter of the imperial concubine was settled. The divine emperor raised his head. His figure twisted. When he reappeared, he was in front of Lord Go and Bu Fong. It was as if he had taken a casual step forward. Bu Fong frowned. The aura of the old man in front of him was too strong. He was as dazzling as the sun. The divine emperor stood with his hands clasped behind his back, walking slowly and looking indifferently at Bu Fong. His eyes were cloudy, but they flickered with a bright light as if there was chaos floating in them. It was as if he had seen through Bu Fong's spirit sea and all his secrets. The divine emperor looked deeply at Bu Fong. There was anticipation and appreciation in his eyes. Burp! Lord Go burped, stuck out his tongue, and licked his mouth. The taste of sweet and sour ribs intoxicated him. Opening his eyes, Lord Go's gaze collided with the divine emperor's. Hey, old man, long time no see. It looks like you've recovered well. Lord Go grinned at the divine emperor. A smile came over the divine emperor's face. The way he looked at Lord Go was very gentle. Chapter 1483. This gaze, this form of address, Bu Fong was slightly taken aback. He glanced at the God Emperor and the Lord Go. This man and dog seemed to know each other. Could it be that the God Emperor and the Lord Go have some unspeakable relationship? Bu Fong's eyes flickered with curiosity. In Bu Fong's arms, Little Hu had recovered a lot of energy. She had deity's blood in her body, so her recovery ability was extremely strong. She immediately became lively and lively, the 9 tails behind her continuously swaying and flickering. Little Hu's eyes were fixed on the divine emperor. Then, he leaped onto the divine emperor's shoulder. His tail kept swinging, slapping the emperor god's face. The divine emperor chuckled and stroked Little Hu's head. It's rare that you still remember Xiaoyuhe from the Sky God Lake. Lord Go and Little Hu were actually so familiar with the Emperor God? The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. All along, Bu Fang had thought that he was the best, but now it seemed that he was still too young. Little Hu and Lord Go were doing much better than him. He even knew the supreme leader of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty and seemed to have a very good relationship with him. His background was much stronger than his. The divine emperor rubbed Little Hu's head with a doting look in his eyes. Gold Armor and the crown prince, who were following behind the divine emperor, were both shocked. The golden armor was surprised that the divine emperor had not smiled like that in many years. On the other hand, the crown prince was astonished because the divine emperor was so approachable. The majestic divine emperor just stood there, but the crown prince already felt a terrifying pressure. Back then, this old man was on the verge of death in the ruins. It was Little Hu who found him, and the Lord Go stepped in and saved him. Lord Go stuck out his tongue, as if he was still savoring the taste of the sweet and sour ribs. Of course, he was explaining the relationship between him and the God Emperor. Yeah, in the end, Little Hu is still my savior, the divine emperor said with a smile. Bu Fang was stunned. The surrounding people were also stunned. Wasn't the divine emperor in seclusion? Why would it appear in the ruins of an ancient heaven god? Besides, how could His Majesty be on the verge of death? In the entire Chaosverse, aside from Empyrean gods, who could cause the Lord God Emperor to be on the verge of death? There was confusion in the golden armor's eyes. As the divine emperor's personal guard, he knew very well how terrifying the divine emperor was. Could it be the arrival of the divine emperor's great tribulation? Was that why he was on the verge of death in the ruins? That was possible. At the divine emperor's level, great tribulations were extremely frightening. Every great tribulation was life-threatening. This was also why many people knew that the divine emperor did not have long to live. But he didn't feel the appearance of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Because I saved this old man, Lord Go's tracks in the ruins were exposed, and I had to flee with Little Hu. If I hadn't found the heaven god's blood and this leg bone, I, Lord Go, would have lost my illustrious reputation. After eating his fill, Lord Go lay on the ground and said lazily, I told you the location of the heaven god's ruins. I told you the location of the heaven god's ruins to thank you for saving my life, the divine emperor said. The divine emperor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I, Xiaoyuhe, have roamed the Chaosverse for so many years, but in the end I was saved by a dog and a fox. The divine emperor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That was right. Even though Lord Go held the heaven god's bone, he was still too weak in front of the divine emperor. The old man in front of him was mighty, and his strength was something Bu Fang had never seen before. Your Majesty, Golden Armor's eyes were filled with worry. He didn't know when the divine emperor had entered the ancient heaven god's ruins. More importantly, the divine emperor was seriously injured. He was really not qualified to be the divine emperor's personal guard. As a personal guard, he could even sacrifice his life for the divine emperor when necessary. That was his duty as an imperial guard. However, he had seriously failed in his duty. It's not your fault. It's my fault. My life is coming to an end, so I planned to charge into the heaven god's burial ground to find the last opportunity to break through. Unfortunately, I didn't find the opportunity. Instead, I was injured by the restriction in the burial ground. However, it was not the heaven god's restriction that injured me. It was a strange creature, the divine emperor said. At this point, his eyes narrowed and a terrifying aura spread out. That creature is very strange. It can replicate abilities and devour divine senses. Most importantly, it reproduces very quickly and grows rapidly. The divine emperor took a deep breath. Back then, he had almost been tricked by that creature. However, he was the divine emperor after all. Although he had severely injured that creature and forced it to flee, that thing was still a hidden danger. He couldn't believe that there was an unknown and terrible creature in the Divine Dynasty's territory. If that creature reproduced, it would be a disaster. The Divine Emperor frowned. Bufang and Lord Go, on the other hand, looked at each other. Lord Go had never known that the Divine Emperor was seriously injured by that creature. Back then, Bufang and Lord Go were separated because of that terrible creature. Could it be that creature had also been teleported to the Xiai Divine Dynasty through the teleportation array? Bufang took a deep breath. His heart was suddenly enveloped by a haze. That creature could seriously injure the Divine Emperor. How terrible was it? I'll order the capture of that creature. Such uncertain factors are not allowed to exist in the Xiai Divine Dynasty. The Divine Emperor stroked Little Hu's head. You have inherited Mu Hongxi's Divine Chef Temple, so your character is somewhat similar to his. You have just inherited the Divine Chef Temple, but you already dared to fight the Mo family so thoroughly. The Divine Emperor looked at Bufang with a strange look in his eyes. In the Divine Emperor's eyes, Bufang's body was glowing with golden light. The light seemed to turn into a pillar that towered into the sky. It was luck. The luck that only the Divine Emperor of a divine dynasty could see. Even he, the Divine Emperor, was shocked by Bufang's luck. That was why the Divine Emperor asked the Crown Prince to be a waiter in Bufang's restaurant. Luck could be contagious. The moment the Crown Prince agreed to the request, the pillar of providence on his body grew a little stronger. This made the Divine Emperor even more certain that he wanted to befriend Bufang. Even Mu Hongxi's pillar of luck was not as strong as this chef's. The Divine Emperor was, after all, the Divine Emperor. Because he had been in seclusion for too long, everything in the palace was messed up by the imperial concubine. When the Divine Emperor returned, he naturally had to reorganize everything. So, after chatting with Bufang and the others for a while, he left. The Crown Prince followed the Divine Emperor. The Crown Prince also followed the Divine Emperor. Of course, he had already confirmed with Bufang that he would go to the restaurant tomorrow and willingly work as a waiter. Of course, Bufang did not comment on that. The Crown Prince belonged to him now, so he had no choice but to do it willingly. Just like that, the storm ended. The surrounding heads of the aristocratic families were stunned. After sending off the Divine Emperor, they broke into an uproar. They knew that something big was going to happen in the capital. They could not believe that Bufang had such a good relationship with the Divine Emperor. With this, the Divine Chef Temple's status in the Divine Dynasty would rise. No one dared to offend the Divine Chef Temple anymore. As long as the Divine Emperor was alive, the Divine Chef Temple would suppress many aristocratic families, and its status would be even higher than when Mu Hongxi was alive. The Divine Chef Temple's skyscraper was destroyed. However, it was all the Mo family's doing. Now, the Mo family had fallen apart. Their head, Mo Pao, was killed by a dog with a bone. One of their two patriarchs was dead, and the other had fled. Even the imperial concubine was thrown into prison by the Divine Emperor. The faction of the Mo family, which once ruled the capital, had completely collapsed at this moment. The Mo family's property had also been transferred to the Divine Chef Temple. No one dared to invade it, and no aristocratic family was stupid enough to offend the Divine Chef Temple, which was like the sun at high noon. Unless the Divine Emperor fell. However, it was impossible for the Divine Emperor to fall in a short time. In the Luo family's skyscraper on the top floor. In the restaurant, a creak rang out. Bufang pushed open the door. Little Hu was lying on Bufang's shoulder. As if he had returned to a familiar environment, Little Hu jumped down and began to jump around. Lord Go strode into the restaurant with his elegant cat-like step. His nose was twitching. It's still the familiar restaurant, and it's still the most comfortable, Lord Go said. After saying that, he wiggled his butt and arrived under the path understanding tree. He laid down and slept soundly. After wandering in the heaven god's relic for so long, Lord Go felt physically and mentally exhausted, and he had lost 1/2 kilogram of flesh. He needed to catch up on sleep and regain the weight he had lost. Little Hu, on the other hand, was alive and kicking. With the heaven god's blood flowing in his body, Little Hu was full of energy now. Yu and Hades' Era, on the other hand, stared at Little Hu and Lord Go with strange faces. Hades' Era was distressed. He regretted not following Lord Go. Even Little Hu, the silly fox, had become a god with Lord Go, while he, the handsome, elegant Hades' Era, who had captured the hearts of thousands of girls, had not even touched the threshold of a demigod. This was simply, damn it, following Bufang did not help his cultivation base at all, except for eating spicy strips. How regretful! I should have hugged Lord Go's thigh. He seemed to feel Hades' Era's sad eyes. Bufang just twitched the corner of his mouth coldly. Then, he turned and stepped into the kitchen. After a great battle, the best thing was to cook delicious food and share it with everyone. Everything in the restaurant was like a battlefield. Today, no one dared to provoke the restaurant. Everyone was eager to curry favor with it. The Luo family no longer tried to stop Luo Sanyang from visiting Bufang. The young master, on the other hand, was greatly stimulated and decided to go into seclusion. He would not come out until he became a god. Outside the restaurant, when the aristocratic families heard the news, they all gathered outside the restaurant. They lined up. This restaurant was now protected by the Divine Emperor, so it was absolutely right to curry favor with it. It was a restaurant opened by the Divine Chef Temple's Lord, and it was backed by the Divine Emperor. Which Earth Divine Chef's restaurant could compare to it? Although it had not opened for business yet, all the business of the surrounding Earth Divine Chefs had been snatched away. In the kitchen, Bufang washed the wok and processed the ingredient. Now that Lord Go had returned, he naturally had to cook a good meal to celebrate. As for what to cook, Bufang already had an idea in his mind. He took out the ingredients from the system's storage space. Of course, many of them were taken out by Bufang from the heaven and earth farmland. He removed the soil, cleaned them, and placed them on the stove. Luan eggs, fat oysters, and some simple ingredients were piled up. Then, he placed a kind of spirit fruit dug out from the heaven and earth farmland on the stove. It was not an ordinary spirit fruit. It was full of spiritual energy. Bufang peeled it, exposed its flesh, and crushed it. While Bufang was preparing to cook, the Divine Emperor had returned to the imperial palace. The night had passed. The sky had turned white, and Venus was shining brightly. After 100 years, the morning court session was held in the imperial palace once again. The Divine Emperor sat on his high throne, while all the aristocratic families and courtiers came. Chapter 1484. Puff. Bufang stretched out his index finger, and a silver flame leaped out with a puff. With a flick of Bufang's finger, it fell into the stove. The black turtle constellation wok was placed on it. As the silver flame roasted it, the water in the wok slowly evaporated, emitting steam. He took out a blue and white porcelain bowl. He picked up the Luan egg, which was emitting a sparkling brilliance, and gently knocked it against the edge of the porcelain bowl. With a crack, a fine crack appeared on it. Bufang grabbed the eggshell with his index finger and thumb and snapped it outward. Instantly the eggshell cracked. The egg liquid fell into the blue and white porcelain bowl. This Luan was a top-level divine beast. Although it was not as good as a phoenix, its egg was also a top-level ingredient. The egg yolk was orange like the setting sun. It was exceptionally beautiful. The surrounding egg white was crystal clear, without the slightest impurity. Bufang grabbed his chopsticks, lifted the blue and white porcelain bowl, and began to beat the egg skillfully. Patter, patter, patter. The chopsticks and the porcelain bowl knocked together, making a rhythmic sound. The egg liquid in the porcelain bowl was also beaten into a muddy mess. After beating the egg liquid, it was like colored glass. When the chopsticks were lifted, the egg liquid could be pulled into thin thread. The egg liquid was not the only thing he needed to do. Next, he needed to process other ingredients. He took out the plump oysters. These oysters were extremely plump. After Bu Fong used the spring of life to raise them, they became more and more delicious. Now that Bu Fong's level was getting higher and higher, he also understood how precious the spring of life was. He found that the spring of life actually contained a unique power of law, although it was very weak. Although it was very weak, it was very mysterious. This law should be the legendary law of life, a very mysterious and practical law among the 5 major laws of the universe. However, compared to the other supreme laws of the universe, the law of life was still a little weaker in terms of attack. In any case, that weak law enhanced the spirituality of the spring of life. Using it to cultivate and clean ingredients could make them more delicious. The spirit fruit that Bu Fong peeled was, in fact, no stranger to Bu Fong. To put it simply, it was a sweet potato. In scientific terms, it was called the divine blood sky sweet potato. Bu Fong smashed the sweet potato into pieces. His divine sense surged and slowly crushed it into powder. Then, he dried it with divine flame. This was sweet potato flour. Of course, this was just a simple sweet potato powder. With Bu Fong's divine sense, it was enough to crush every cell in the sweet potato and turn it into pure powder. In addition to sweet potato flour, Bu Fong also needed to prepare other ingredients. Purple garlic was an ingredient that had been with Bu Fong for a long time. The basic ingredients cultivated in the heaven and earth farmland could be used in many dishes. Therefore, Bu Fong asked Nyo Han San to cultivate them diligently. He cut the garlic sprouts into small pieces. He also took out the oysters that had been washed with the spring of life. He poured the acheron of helplessness into it. As the wine flowed into them, the oysters swallowed and spat. Marinate for a while. Bu Fong poured the garlic sprouts into the oysters and began to stir. Then, he added some special spices, poured the sweet potato flour into it, and added the spring of life, turning it into a slurry. With this, the ingredients were ready. The black turtle constellation wok was extremely smooth, and its surface was emitting hot steam. Bu Fong reached out his hand, feeling the scorching heat on the surface of the black turtle constellation wok. He lifted the porcelain bowl, preparing to pour the oyster slurry into the wok. However, after hesitating for a while, Bu Fong glanced outside the kitchen. He opened the kitchen door. That way, the fragrance in the kitchen could drift out. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. He returned to the stove. Bu Fong poured the oyster slurry into the wok. Sizzle, as soon as the oyster slurry entered the wok, it froze instantly. The scorching heat made the oysters in the wok tremble continuously. They began to solidify at a speed visible to the naked eye. A wave of fragrance began to diffuse. The fishy smell of the oysters had been removed. As the temperature rose, the fragrance became very thick, leaving only a simple aroma. Together with the sweet potato flour and garlic sprouts, Bu Fong, who was standing by the wok, couldn't help but swallow. This dish was an aroma bomb. Regardless of the taste, the aroma was absolutely top-notch. Among the many dishes that Bu Fong had cooked, the aroma of this dish ranked in the top 3. Bu Fong's nose twitched, sniffing in fascination. Of course, sniffing was one thing, but the cooking couldn't be neglected. Bu Fong's movements didn't slow down. He first fried one side of the wok. After that, he flipped the wok and flipped the other side. With a slurping sound, the sizzling sound rang out again. Once again, the thick aroma spread, lingering in the whole place, stirring up the taste buds. The aroma slowly drifted out of the kitchen. In the restaurant, Lord Go, who was sleeping under the path understanding tree, instantly opened his eyes wide. His eyes were round, full of surprise. The lively Foxy also stopped. It lifted one leg and slightly bent it. Its fox ears twitched, its nose twitched, and the 9 tails behind its buttocks swayed continuously. It seemed to be attracted by the aroma. The fox's bright eyes gazed at the kitchen. Hades' era had long forgotten his resentment. It smells so good. This aroma. Damn it, Bufang young man made a new dish? Why does that mangy dog cook a new dish as soon as he comes back? It's not fair. The resentment in Hades' era's heart grew deeper. You also pursed her lips in anticipation. She took a deep breath, her face showing an intoxicated look. The aroma lingered in the restaurant. Outside the door stood a large group of diners, who came from various aristocratic families. At this moment, the experts from the aristocratic families were all dumbfounded. They all subconsciously twitched their noses, and then their eyes widened. What the F***ck? It smells so good. I've never smelled such a strong aroma. It smells better than the food cooked by an earth-divine chef. I'm drooling. Go back and tell the patriarch. I'm not going back. The experts from the aristocratic families went crazy. Sometimes a kind of aroma could drive people completely crazy. It was like when you were strolling around a street corner and suddenly saw the aroma of coriander, and you could not help but be attracted. It was a feeling that seemed to stir your soul. Luo Sanyang leaned on the dining table. She could not wait to taste the dish. In the divine chef temple, the place where the ancient heaven god's inheritance was sealed, Summer stood here, leaning against the railing. Her graceful figure looked very charming. Suddenly, a faint aroma wafted over. Summer's eyes lit up. His body suddenly shot forward, and in a short while, he disappeared from where he stood. King Pingyang was riding a chariot, pulled by a silver dragon, across the void. He was going to the Divine Dynasty's palace for the morning court session. However, suddenly, he smelled a fragrance in midair. It made him move his tongue involuntarily, and a rumbling sound came from his stomach. He was a god king, but when he smelled the aroma, he actually felt hungry. King Pingyang hesitated for 3 seconds, then followed his stomach, stepped on the chariot, and flew toward the direction where the aroma came from. Before long, he landed outside the Luo family's skyscraper. Oh, isn't this the little chef's restaurant? What delicious food is he cooking? King Pingyang was surprised. Then, he put his hands behind his back and walked into the restaurant with his big belly. He naturally did not care about the line outside. With his son's friendship with Bufang, why would he need to line up? King Pingyang stepped into the restaurant without batting an eyelid. He greeted Luo Sanyang. Summer had also arrived. Sitting in a chair, she waited in silence. Tasted a little like oyster pancake, but different. Summer's curiosity was about to explode. In the kitchen, after that, Bufang began his final move. The oyster pancake, which had been fried on both sides, trembled in the wok. Bufang picked up the blue and white porcelain bowl that contained the egg, poured it over the edge of the wok, and sizzled. Sizzle, as soon as the egg entered the wok, the aroma exploded. The closer they got to the restaurant, the stronger the aroma became. Everyone was mesmerized by it. Bufang felt a wave of fragrance assaulting his nostrils. It was accompanied by a resplendent golden light, causing his hair to flutter unceasingly. He grabbed the black turtle constellation wok. Bufang began to shake the wok slightly. It was the kind of slight shaking that allowed the egg to seep into the oyster pancake. His divine sense surged. The law of the divine flame and the power of the law contained in him all seeped into the wok. He shook the wok. Then, he shook his wrist. The wok collided with the stove with a clatter. Immediately, the oyster pancake flew out of the wok, tumbling in the air. With a clatter, it fell back into the wok. He shook it slightly to distribute the egg evenly, and the aroma became stronger. Bufang licked his lips. He picked up a blue and white porcelain plate and poured the oyster pancake into it. The oyster pancake covered the entire plate. Hot steam rose from the center. The whole dish emitted a golden light. Moreover, the plump oysters in the dish seemed to be shivering with steam. Outside the restaurant, in the sky, there seemed to be a terrible wind sweeping over. Bufang's dish seemed to be about to trigger the heavenly thunder. However, it was not easy to trigger the heavenly thunder in the divine dynasty. After brewing for a while, the heavenly thunder dispersed. His mind sank into the heaven and earth farmland and dug out a jar of vermilion fruit jam from Nyo Han-san. It was a jar of vermilion sauce. It was Nyo Hansen's special vermilion fruit jam. Ever since Bufang accidentally found this sauce, he had been thinking about it. This time, he just happened to ask Nyo Han-san for a can. This made Nyo Hansen's heart ache. Every jar of vermilion fruit jam had been brewed and fermented for 49 days after he had gone through untold hardships to make it. It was very precious and delicious. Bufang opened the jar. The red vermilion fruit jam inside emitted a fragrant aroma. Bufang scooped a spoonful of it with a porcelain spoon. Of course, the oyster pancake had to be paired with the sauce to be the ultimate delicacy. He poured a spoonful of vermilion fruit jam onto the oyster pancake and slowly smoothed it. The golden light seemed to dim a lot. However, it became more and more perfect. Bufang grabbed the spoon and swallowed the remaining sauce. It was sweet and sour, and it also carried a unique will of the great path. It seemed to make all the pores in his body open. It was rare for Nyo Han-san to make such a delicious dish. The oyster pancake was finished. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. He was looking forward to it. Holding the bowl of oyster pancake, he walked out of the restaurant. The aroma of oyster, egg, and garlic blended together, making this taste natural. Every breath he took was filled with extreme deliciousness. Bufang's heart was filled with anticipation. This dish wasn't difficult to cook, but the control of the fire was very strict. Of course, the combination of ingredients was also very important. Moreover, the last vermilion fruit jam was indispensable. Holding the bowl of oyster pancake, Bufang lifted the curtain of the kitchen and walked out. As soon as he walked out of the kitchen, outside the restaurant, pairs of wolf-like eyes stared at Bufang. Gulp, gulp, the sound of swallowing rang out. Chapter 1485. In the Divine Dynasty's palace. The majestic palace occupied a vast area. The imperial palace was resplendent in gold and jade. After entering the palace, the ground was paved with jade. 2 rows of guards stood outside the gate, their auras fluctuating. One expert after another flew in from outside the palace. As soon as they stepped through the gate, they landed and began to walk at a steady pace. The heads of the aristocratic families met, nodded, and chatted with each other. Some high-ranking officials and ministers walked barefoot, dressed in loose robes and with their hair hanging loosely over their shoulders. They laughed as they walked, cupping their fists at each other. The divine emperor of the Xiai divine dynasty was not so strict about etiquette, but the imperial concubine paid great attention to etiquette during her reign, which annoyed many experts. Many high-ranking officials even chose to live in seclusion at home and never went out. Now that the divine emperor had returned, these officials went out. Inside the palace, eunuchs in robes stood respectfully on both sides of the palace, bowing their heads and cupping their fists as they greeted the high-ranking officials. The maids did not attend the court session. The officials filed in and stood on both sides of the palace. Sitting in the host's seat was the divine emperor, whose aura was so powerful that it seemed capable of suppressing everything in its path. He sat on the high seat and watched indifferently as one official after another entered the palace. They stood on both sides of the palace. Soon, all the officials, kings, and heads of the aristocratic families had gathered. One of the eunuchs grabbed a golden gong and struck it with all his might. The sound of the gong was deafening, and it seemed to possess a mysterious power as it continuously spread out. "My dear officials, are you all here?" the divine emperor said faintly from his high seat. As soon as his voice rang out, the officials looked left and right. A high-ranking official walked out with a strange look on his face, cupped his fists at the divine emperor, and said, "Your Majesty, King Pingyang has not arrived yet." In a restaurant in the Luo family's skyscraper, King Pingyang swallowed and stared at the fried oyster pancake placed on the table in front of him. His nostrils were wide, and his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. As King Pingyang, he had eaten all kinds of dishes, but he had never been so eager to taste the fried oyster pancake in front of him. Luo Sanyang, Summer, and the others were also a little impatient. The aroma tickled their taste buds, and the fried oyster pancake that seemed to glow with a golden light inexplicably stirred their excitement. This dish is called fried oyster. Bu Fang looked at the group of people lying on the table and said. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He was very satisfied with the attitude of this group of people. In the face of delicious food, one should be so hungry and thirsty. Bu Fang coughed lightly. He still had to introduce this dish properly. However, he was interrupted by the crowd. They really couldn't be bothered to listen to Bu Fang's nonsense anymore. They couldn't wait to taste the delicacies. Bu Fang was not angry. After all, he was the one who made the dishes. He knew very well how tempting it was. With a shake of his hand, the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared, spinning in his hand. The next moment, the saber slashed down. Suddenly, the saber light flashed. The fried oyster pancake was cut into several pieces, just like a pizza being cut into pieces. The vermilion fruit jam was also evenly distributed on it. Bu Fang stretched out his hand. Energy filled his hand and turned it into a glove. Then, he took out a piece of fried oyster pancake. One for you, one for Lord Go, one for Summer, one for Little Hu. Bu Fang was distributing the dishes very seriously. The people here were all acquaintances. It was very fair that Bu Fang cut them into pieces of the same size. The crowd took the fried oyster pancake, held it in their hands, and looked at the oil flowing over it. They couldn't help but take deep breath. Outside the door, a group of diners craned their neck. They stared at the group of people in the restaurant who were tasting the delicacies, and their hearts were filled with resentment. They stared at the fried oyster pancake. Is this where the aroma comes from? I want to eat it. Everyone swallowed and looked a little impatient. Bu Fang looked at King Pingyang in front of him with some confusion. Why is this guy here? King Pingyang looked expectantly at the remaining 2 pieces of fried oyster pancake. Come on, give I one. King Pingyang could not wait and was very hungry. He stared at Bu Fang with a sincere look in his eyes. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. He wanted to refuse King Pingyang because Bu Fang was not familiar with him. But on second thought, he gave up. After all, the young master of King Pingyang had helped him many times before. For the sake of this guy's son, he would let him have a good meal. So Bu Fang handed the last piece of fried oyster pancake to King Pingyang. King Pingyang took it and held it carefully in his hands. There was a fat oyster at the top of the fried oyster pancake, and it almost fell off. King Pingyang opened his mouth wide and was about to swallow the oyster. However, just as he was about to eat it, from the direction of the imperial palace came the loud sound of a golden gong. King Pingyang's ears twitched and he froze. The expression on his face changed dramatically. Oh no! King Pingyang was so anxious that he did not even have time to eat the fried oyster pancake. He sped away like a shooting star. Even though he was moving at high speed, he did not forget to protect the fried oyster pancake in his hand. Bu Fang looked expressionlessly at King Pingyang, who was running away. Then, he fixed his eyes on the fried oyster pancake in his hand again. He took a deep breath. He picked up the fried oyster pancake, opened his mouth wide, and stuffed a corner of it into his mouth. Then, he took a bite silently and began to chew. A wave of dense egg fragrance spread out in his mouth. It was incomparably majestic, causing his entire body to feel refreshed and his pores to open up. The next thing that exploded was the chewiness. Yes, chewiness, because it was made of sweet potato flour. The fried oyster pancake was a little chewy, and it did not break after being bitten. It was soft and moist, and it gave off an amazing aroma in his mouth. When the fat oyster was bitten into pieces, he could almost hear a slurping sound, and the juice inside spilled out and flowed all over his mouth. "It's delicious!" Summer was stunned. After taking a bite of the fried oyster pancake, she felt that her whole body was immersed in this simple yet extraordinary delicacy. Compared to the complicated delicacies cooked by earth gods in the past, this simple delicacy was even more enticing to her. Moreover, it caused her heart to tremble and sway. This ordinariness was full of extraordinary things, which surprised her. He is indeed a divine chef who can break the seal of the ancient heaven god's inheritance. This kind of unique cooking skill is indeed not something that those earth divine chefs can cook. Gulp. Xia Kiki took a deep breath and raised her head, her white neck emitting a sparkling brilliance. She did not hide her face, which was somewhat similar to Mu Hongxi's, and was breathtakingly beautiful. Coupled with her misty face, which was tempted by the delicious food, it made her even more charming. A feast for the eyes. Perhaps this was what she was talking about. Outside the restaurant, the group of diners was already stunned. There were delicious food and beautiful women. Was this restaurant a fairyland? They were dumbstruck. In the imperial palace of the divine dynasty, the divine emperor sat in his seat. His eyes were indifferent as he looked down at the courtiers. The purpose of the morning court session today was to reorganize the court. He needed to sort out some messy things, and he needed to arrange everything that needed to be arranged before the great calamity came. In case everything would be in chaos after the calamity. Some of the families with evil intentions needed to be eliminated, and those confidants cultivated by the imperial concubines naturally needed to be wiped out. Most importantly, he needed to send experts to search for that strange creature, the terrible creature who had almost killed him with a sneak attack. That creature gave the divine emperor a very strong sense of crisis. He felt that it would bring a great calamity to the divine dynasty. The divine emperor's great calamity was coming. This hunch could not be wrong. So, he had to seize the opportunity before that living being grew up to kill this danger. King Pingyang isn't here yet? The divine emperor suddenly paused, frowned, glanced at the crowd, and said. His voice rumbled like thunder. Does this Hu Pingyang not take me seriously? When did he get the guts to do that? The divine emperor thought to himself, his eyes flashing. As soon as his voice rang out, outside the imperial palace, a figure quickly rushed over. He ran all the way and stood outside the imperial palace. Your Majesty, I'm here. King Pingyang cried out. Then, he stepped into the palace. He was holding an oyster pancake in his hand. He was very careful, for fear that the oysters would fall out. Such a loss would make his heart ache so much that he could not breathe. As he stepped into the palace, he smiled and nodded to his old friends, whom he had not seen for a long time. On the other hand, he walked toward his seat. A strong fragrance wafted out of King Pingyang's arms. It smelled and smelled. The courtiers in the divine dynasty paused, then they all twitched their noses subconsciously. Sizzle, one of them twitched his nose and made a snorting sound. One of them twitched his nose and made a series of sizzling sounds. They felt that it might be wrong to do so, so they glanced at the expressionless divine emperor and did not dare to be so blatant. However, they still turned their faces sideways and sniffed. It smells so good, said one of the courtiers, his white beard trembling. What's that smell? What did Hu Pingyang bring to the morning court? One of the princes swallowed a mouthful of saliva and thought. Cough, cough, on the throne, the divine emperor cleared his throat. The courtiers' hearts skipped a beat, and they did not dare to do anything else. Let's continue with the morning court, said the divine emperor. The divine emperor said. He glanced at King Pingyang. King Pingyang hurriedly nodded at the divine emperor with a smile, looking very sincere in admitting his mistake. The divine emperor did not bother to pay attention to him, and began the meeting. The divine emperor continued to talk about the content of the meeting. That kind of strange creature is a threat to the divine dynasty. One is nothing, but they reproduce very quickly. If thousands of them attack the divine dynasty, it will be a disaster. Oh! Halfway through the divine emperor's speech, a groan suddenly rang out. For a moment, the atmosphere became a little awkward. The faces of the people present became strange. Everyone glanced around and rested their eyes on King Pingyong's seat. There, he was holding an oyster pancake and taking a bite. The divine emperor was somewhat speechless. However, in order to maintain the seriousness of the morning court, he did not say anything. He cleared his throat and continued, "We must contain this kind of disaster as soon as possible. Otherwise, the construction of the divine dynasty and, oh!" Another moan interrupted the divine emperor's words. Everyone's eyes were fixed on King Pingyong again. They saw him take a bite of the oyster pancake. The steaming oyster pancake in his hand was emitting a rich aroma. A fat oyster quivered and swung through the air, splashing oil everywhere. A rich life force, aroma, and mist filled the air. Gulp, gulp, gulp. When the courtiers in the palace saw this, they felt a pang of hunger, and their bellies began to rumble. The corner of the divine emperor's mouth twitched, and he touched his belly. King Pingyong swallowed the oyster with a slurp. His eyes were misty, and he moaned. He was immersed in the delicious taste of the oyster pancake, and he could not extricate himself. Suddenly, Hu Pingyong's body shook. He only felt a majestic pressure spreading out, almost pressing him to the ground. Hu Pingyong froze. He looked up and saw the chaos swirling in the divine emperor's eyes, which sounded like the roar of 9 dragons. With a thud, he slapped the armrest of his chair. "Hu Pingyong, do you really think I'm so old that I can't even lift a knife?" Chapter 1486. The divine emperor's roar silenced the entire imperial court. No one dared to utter a single word. Everyone was as quiet as cicadas in winter. "Do you really think I can't lift my knife?" The divine emperor, sitting on the high seat, raised his eyebrows, which made the hearts of the courtiers tremble. When the divine emperor was angry, he could kill millions of people. How dare King Pingyong challenge the divine emperor's bottom line? This guy, doesn't he know how to write the word death? The courtiers all cursed in their minds. After so many years, the first morning court of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty had opened in such a funny way. Perhaps because the taste of the fried oyster pancake was too delicious, the whole palace was filled with its aroma. The divine emperor was furious, and King Pingyong was taken aback. Did he dare to eat it? Did he? Of course not. He could only stare at the divine emperor with wide eyes. He just wanted to have breakfast. Step by step, the divine emperor walked down from his seat with his hands clasped behind his back. Like a dormant dragon, the courtiers present did not even dare to breathe. The divine emperor walked up to Hu Pingyong, who was staring at him with wide eyes. His eyes fell on the fried oyster pancake in Hu Pingyong's hand. The oil was flowing on the pancake, and a faint aroma and vitality were spreading. This feeling was a little different from the others. Hu Pingyong swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He felt that the divine emperor's gaze was as sharp as a knife, cutting him until all the hairs on his body stood on end. "Your Majesty," Hu Pingyong took a deep breath and wanted to say something. He felt that if he didn't say something, he might be killed by the divine emperor's glare. Suddenly, Hu Pingyong's pupils constricted. He found that the fried oyster pancake in his hand was gone. Oh! Hu Pingyong's hair stood on end as he stared at the divine emperor in front of him. The divine emperor grabbed the fried oyster pancake and shoved it into his mouth. After chewing for a while, he stopped abruptly. Hu Pingyong roared in his heart. That fried oyster pancake was his. But he had begged Bufong for it, and the divine emperor had eaten it so irresponsibly? Hu Pingyong and the God Emperor's relationship was considered good. Back then, they had both charged into battle and shared the same pot of rice, so they did not dislike each other. But Hu Pingyong's heart ached. That fried oyster was a rare delicacy. The aura of the law of life. After eating the fried oyster, the divine emperor's eyes suddenly lit up like the brightest star in the night sky. Under the divine emperor's sharp gaze, the ministers kept retreating. A dish containing the law of life? The divine emperor took a deep breath. After eating a piece of oyster pancake, he could even feel that the power of the Great Tribulation, which had been spreading around his body like maggots in tarsal bones, was actually suppressed at this moment. That's right, the power of the Great Calamity was suppressed. That nightmarish feeling weakened quite a bit. How was this possible? A dish can actually suppress my Great Tribulation. The divine emperor's eyes were filled with disbelief. He looked at Hu Pingyang and then looked around. Then, a bright light flickered on his face, as if he was excited and looking forward to it. Hu Pingyang, let this emperor ask you, where did this delicacy come from? At the restaurant. The sky was just beginning to brighten. The group of people outside the restaurant had already gone crazy. The aroma was like a bomb that exploded in the crowd, charring them on the outside and making them unable to extricate themselves. Inside the restaurant, Luo Sanyang, Summer, and the others ate contentedly. Bufang cleaned up the plates and returned to the kitchen. A commotion rang out in the crowd. One by one, the figures separated. Although they were still immersed in the delicacy, most of them were shocked by the figure in front of them. The Crown Prince. It's the Crown Prince. I heard he's going to be a waiter in this restaurant. He looks awesome. This restaurant is too awesome. The people around them murmured excitedly. In the distance, the Crown Prince, with disheveled hair and a long white robe, walked barefoot toward the restaurant. His eyes flashed, and his aura was extremely powerful. Even though he was here to be a waiter, he was still very arrogant. Of course, he couldn't be arrogant in front of Bufang because he was defeated by Bufang. This was also what made him feel aggrieved. He was a crown prince who had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, yet he had to work as a waiter in a shabby restaurant. What kind of humiliation was that? He, the crown prince, wanted to see who, as a waiter, dared to ask him to serve them. The corners of the crown prince's mouth twitched slightly as he laughed. He looked very cool and at ease. Bufang walked out of the kitchen, leaned against the door, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked indifferently at Crown Prince, who had just stepped into the restaurant. The Crown Prince's aura fluctuated and his eyes shone brightly. Since you lost the bet, here I am. The Crown Prince looked straight at Bufang and said. His tone was neither servile nor overbearing, filled with dignity. The surrounding experts were also intimidated by the Crown Prince's aura and didn't dare to move. With the Crown Prince as a waiter, who would dare to come to the restaurant to eat? Many people felt that Bufang's decision was really wrong. Bufang glanced at the Crown Prince with an expressionless face. Then, he rummaged through the system's storage space for a while. Before long, he took out a neat uniform. With a clatter, he threw it to the Crown Prince. Tie up your hair and put on your uniform. You are here to be a waiter, not to take a bath. Bufang said. The Crown Prince's face froze. He glanced at the uniform on the ground, and his eyes seemed to be spewing fire. I am the Crown Prince. How can I wear the robe of a servant? I'd rather die than submit. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth, and gave the Crown Prince an indifferent look. He'd rather die than submit? Why was he so unyielding? Blackie, lend me your dog bone, Bufang said. Lord Go, lying under the path understanding tree, rolled his eyes. That's a heaven god's bone, not a dog bone. Lord Go corrected him. Nevertheless, Lord Go handed the dog bone to Bufang. Holding the heaven god's bone, he turned his eyes and rested them on the Crown Prince. I heard that you'd rather die than submit? Why do you insist on your own will? Bufang said. The Crown Prince's expression changed dramatically, and the skin on his face began to tremble like a sieve. He took a deep breath. A look of horror came into his eyes. The heaven god's bone was a terrible artifact that could blow up black and white. Although he was talented, in terms of realm and fighting prowess, he was far inferior to black and white. He didn't dare to be hit by the bone. He couldn't bear the consequences. Wait. The crown prince raised a hand and sternly stopped Bufang. Imperial Father said that being a waiter here is actually a chance for me to train my mental state, so I won't reject your request. After saying that, the crown prince picked up the uniform from the ground. Rumble. The uniform fluttered, and the crown prince put on his clothes. A red ribbon fluttered in the wind, and his hair was immediately tied up with it. He even lovingly tied a bow on it. Very good. Bufang was very satisfied with the crown prince's adaptability. This was the kind of obedient employee the restaurant needed. After returning the heaven god's bone to Lord Go, Bufang patted the crown prince on the shoulder. I have high hopes for you. You will definitely become an excellent waiter, Bufang said seriously. Then, he turned to the group of diners outside and said, the restaurant's business officially begins today. Bufang's voice rang out. A commotion broke out outside the door. The crown prince stood behind Bufang with a sneer on his face. He wanted to see who dared to eat in his restaurant. He was the crown prince. Would they dare to ask the crown prince to serve them? Did they deserve it? In fact, it was just as the crown prince thought. The crown prince was the heir to the divine emperor's throne. Who dared to ask him to serve them? Especially the heads of aristocratic families. Once they were remembered by the crown prince, when the divine emperor's great tribulation came at that time, even if they were aristocratic families, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. So, even if Bufang announced the opening of the restaurant, very few people came to the restaurant to eat. It could even be said that there was basically no one, except for Luo Sanyang and Summer, who were already in the restaurant. Summer ordered the oyster pancake. Although the fried oyster was delicious, he still liked the oyster pancake. Luo Sanyang looked at the menu and ordered sweet and sour ribs. Yes, it was the Lord Go's favorite sweet and sour ribs. Seeing the Lord Go eat happily, Luo Sanyang's heart itched. Remember the name of the dish, and tell me at the window, Bufang said, looking at the crown prince. After that, Bufang turned, lifted the curtain, and entered the kitchen. Ting-a-ling. The curtain fell, causing the bell on the door to jingle. The crown prince kept a straight face and was a little confused. He was struggling in his heart, not knowing whether he should do as Bufang said. Hey! If you make a mistake, you'll be stripped again. Don't blame me for not reminding you that Xiao Bai is a professional at stripping. In the kitchen, Bufang's indifferent voice drifted out. Buzz, at the door, Xiao Bai's figure emerged. His mechanical eyes flashed, and there was a bright light flowing in them. The crown prince and Xiao Bai looked at each other. The man and the puppet seemed to be frozen on the spot. After a long time, the crown prince still didn't move. The crown prince didn't seem to believe it. He was a dignified imperial prince, so how could he be stripped naked by a puppet? The crown prince was very proud. It was a coincidence that he lost to Bufang. This puppet didn't seem to have a strong aura. Could it be that he couldn't defeat Bufang, but a puppet? Ridiculous! The crown prince clasped his hands behind his back and stood still. It's impossible for me to serve you, not in this life. The crown prince thought proudly. Suddenly, a sigh drifted out of the kitchen. Bufang sighed softly. Then, Xiao Bai, who stood in front of the crown prince, moved. Buzz, Xiao Bai's eyes flickered. The next moment, he appeared in front of the crown prince. Ridiculous! Do you think I'm afraid of a mere puppet? The crown prince sneered. He could even fight a god king, so what was a puppet to him? Damn it! The crown prince was shocked. Because Xiao Bai's palm, which was as big as a cattail leaf fan, was coming straight toward the crown prince's upper body, the crown prince gave a long roar. The power of law in his body surged. Although he had promised the divine emperor that he would come to the restaurant as a waiter, as the crown prince, he naturally had his pride. How could he give in so easily? Besides, how could he really become a waiter? If it weren't for the heart demon and the divine emperor's request, he would never have come. Bam! The crown prince's palm, which contained the two supreme laws of the universe, collided with Xiao Bai. The confident smile on the crown prince's face soon froze. He found that the power of law in his palm was crumbling. This, the crown prince? Rip! A tearing sound rang out. The crown prince felt the world spin. Then, the scene in front of him changed dramatically. His body felt cold as the wind blew against him. With a bang, the crown prince flew through the air and smashed outside the restaurant. Summer looked at the crown prince sympathetically. Xiao Bai's puppet could even strip silver armor, a god king. Although the crown prince was strong, after being immune to the laws, he was no match for silver armor. How could he resist Xiao Bai? Xiao Bai stripped the crown prince's clothes and uniform, carefully folded them, and placed them on the ground. His mechanical eyes looked sincerely at the crown prince. The crown prince was dumbfounded. He hurriedly put on his clothes, his face cold. Boom! Just as the crown prince was putting on his clothes, in the distance, after eating the fried oyster pancake, Hades' Era sat on the ground. His eyes flashed with bright light, and his body surged with mighty power as he began to break through to the demigod realm. Chapter 1487. Hades' Era was about to break through. He had been holding back for so long, and after experiencing the prosperity of the Xiai Great World, he was finally about to break through. Of course, he had also eaten countless precious treasures. After all, Bufang had an extraordinary status in the Divine Chef Temple, and Hades' Era had made a lot of trouble in the temple by borrowing Bufang's name. A lot of cultivation resources had been poured on him. Moreover, he had been stimulated by Bufang's fried oyster pancake. Although Bufang did not deliberately make the fried oyster pancake have any function to help him break through, at Bufang's current level, any dish he cooked would have incredible power. Nether King Ha's breakthrough was out of everyone's expectation, but it was reasonable. Of course, breaking through to the demigod realm was nothing to be surprised about. In the Divine Dynasty, there were many juniors who had broken through to the demigod realm. Compared to the Crown Prince's streaking, Hades' Era's breakthrough did not attract anyone's attention. The Crown Prince's face was a little dark. Would he be stripped for a mistake? He really didn't believe that it was possible. He went back into the restaurant and stared at Xiao Bai with great vigilance. As the Crown Prince, he had been tricked the first time, so how could he be tricked the second time? Did he really think he was a fool? The people around him widened their eyes again and stared at the Crown Prince. Sure enough, the Crown Prince entered the restaurant with a rebellious heart. Not long after, the Crown Prince's white body was sent flying, crashing to the ground once more. The atmosphere at that moment was awkward. Everyone widened their eyes and admired the Crown Prince's fleshly body. The Crown Prince gave in. After being stripped 3 times, he put on his clothes at lightning speed and rushed into the restaurant. Owner Bu, 1 sweet and sour ribs and 1 oyster pancake. The Crown Prince leaned against the window and shouted at the top of his lungs under Xiao Bai's gaze. The crowd burst into an uproar. The Crown Prince had really become a waiter in this restaurant. This is really too exciting. Many diners looked at each other and saw the eagerness in each other's eyes. Were they going to eat in a restaurant? This way they could experience the services that the Crown Prince brought. Just when the group of people were hesitating. In the kitchen, Bufang had finished cooking. A rich fragrance wafted out from it. Bufang placed the 2 dishes on the window of the restaurant, knocked on the door, and yelled at the Crown Prince, "Bring the dishes over. Remember, when the customers finish their dishes, they must take their plates back in time." Bufang's words made the Crown Prince's eyes turn red. Did Bufang really treat him, the Crown Prince, as a waiter? He had to clear the plates. That was the job of the servants. Didn't we agree that it would be fine as long as everyone expressed their intentions? Crown Prince wanted to refuse, but the cold glint in his mechanical eyes made his heart tremble. He was really afraid of being stripped naked. Forget it, I'll just live a peaceful life for now. I'll just take it as training my mind. The Crown Prince closed his eyes tightly, turned his head away, and walked into the distance. Soon, he reached out with 2 dishes in his hand. The sweet and sour ribs glowed brilliantly. A rich fragrance wafted out of it, making the Crown Prince's nose twitch. He didn't expect that the dishes in this restaurant seemed to be so good. The Crown Prince opened his eyes, surprised and bewildered. The glowing sweet and sour ribs made him swallow a mouthful of saliva. The taste seems to be very good as well. The Crown Prince brought the sweet and sour ribs to Luo Sanyang's table. Holding the oyster pancake in one hand, he stared at the sweet and sour ribs. Luo Sanyang took a deep breath. The rich fragrance tickled her nostrils. Luo Sanyang could not help but let out a charming smile. Mr. Bu's dishes are definitely worth looking forward to. She grabbed a pair of chopsticks and happily picked up a piece of sweet and sour ribs. She was about to put it into her mouth when she stopped, because he was standing next to her. Holding the oyster pancake in one hand, the Crown Prince smacked his lips and stared at the sweet and sour ribs on Luo Sanyang's plate. That gaze, that expression, it was a little awkward. Luo Sanyang hesitated for a moment. Then, she thought of the prince's identity. She couldn't help but pout her red lips. "Your Highness, please eat," Luo Sanyang said reluctantly. The Crown Prince's eyes lit up, and he gave Luo Sanyang an appreciative look. "Although I'm just taking a look, since you're so enthusiastic, I won't stand on ceremony." The Crown Prince pursed his lips and said. After saying that, he picked up his chopsticks and picked up the sweet and sour ribs. Rip! The sound of clothes ripping resounded. The Crown Prince's white body was sent flying again. Xia Xia's figure floated and caught the oyster pancake that was flying into the air. He looked sympathetically at the Crown Prince, who had been stripped naked, then grabbed an oyster pancake and stuffed it into his mouth. Poor disciple, he must have felt the fear of being dominated by a crazy clothes-stripping demon. The Crown Prince burst into tears. As a prince, couldn't he even eat a dish? Perhaps this was the cultivation of a waiter buzz in the distance. Hades' era's breakthrough had begun to reach the final stage. Around his body, the power of laws slowly emerged. He was comprehending the law that belonged to him. As long as he comprehended the law, he would be considered a demigod. The Crown Prince put on his uniform again and walked in the restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes were sharp as he stared outside. Except for Xia Xia and Luo Sanyang, he wanted to see who else dared to enter the restaurant. If they dared to take half a step into the restaurant, he would definitely kill them with his eyes. It was not easy to enjoy the one-stop service of the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince smiled coldly. Dong, a deafening sound of a golden gong rang out. The sound seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens. The Crown Prince paused for a moment, then focused. It was the sound of a golden gong in the imperial palace, which represented the end of the morning court. It was a pity that if he didn't come to the restaurant to work as a waiter, he would be holding a meeting in the court at this moment. He could feel his father's awe-inspiring majesty. The morning court of the Divine Emperor was naturally spectacular. It was not like the morning court held by the imperial concubine. The whole morning court was simply a forum for the internal forces of the Mo family. The courtiers in the court did not even bother to attend. The Crown Prince sighed and suddenly felt a little lonely. As the son of the Divine Emperor, he was under a lot of pressure. When the morning court was over, the courtiers should have left. Each of them had important things to do. These courtiers and kings were the pillars of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. Without them, the Xiaoyi divine dynasty might have fallen apart long ago. At the thought of this, the Crown Prince became a little solemn. They were all respectable people. Bam! Xiao Bai's huge palm slapped the Crown Prince on the top of his head. The Crown Prince's face froze. I'm just in a daze. There's no need to strip me, is there? The Crown Prince looked at Xiao Bai with some grief and indignation. Even if I teach him a lesson, I should be moderate. Do you really think I, the Crown Prince, can't lift my knife? Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. He patted the Crown Prince on the head again, then raised his hand and pointed into the distance. The Crown Prince snorted. Who dared to come to the restaurant when he was the Crown Prince? He turned his head. An uproar broke out. An uproar broke out in the crowd. The crowd parted to the sides. Their eyes widened as they watched one expert after another whose bodies seemed to be blooming with golden light stride toward them. The aura of these experts was extremely vigorous and fearsome. It's Censor Chen. It's King Tianlong. Isn't that the Minister of the Ministry of Rights and the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel? The crowd was dumbfounded as they watched a group of high-ranking officials and nobles file into the restaurant. These people all had extraordinary identities. As the Crown Prince had said, each of them was the pillar of the divine dynasty, the pillar of the divine dynasty. These experts were all smiling and chatting with each other. When they stepped into the restaurant and saw the Crown Prince dressed as a waiter, they were all slightly taken aback. Then, he patted the Crown Prince on the shoulder with a smile. Everyone found a seat and sat down. King Pingyang's face was flushed as he strode into the restaurant. Make way, all of you, make way, King Pingyang said seriously to the group of people crowding at the door. Startled, the experts of the aristocratic families stepped back. A figure in a golden dragon robe stepped into the restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. Hiss, the whole place was filled with the sound of people sucking in cold breath. The Divine Emperor. The Divine Emperor came to the restaurant in person. The morning court session has just ended. What the hell? Isn't His Majesty busy with affairs every day? Why does he have time to eat in the restaurant? The experts of the aristocratic families were all going crazy. The Divine Emperor was a noble figure, so they did not dare to be presumptuous. They all stepped back and bowed their heads respectfully to the Divine Emperor. The Divine Emperor clasped his hands behind his back, and gold armor followed behind him. The two of them stepped into the restaurant amidst King Pingyang's laughter. At this moment, the deserted restaurant suddenly became lively. The Crown Prince's face was a little stiff. It was his father's business. He had to do it, and he did not dare to refuse. For a moment, the Crown Prince was a little hesitant. He took a deep breath, then exhaled it all of a sudden. The next moment, he approached the Crown Prince with a big smile on his face. "Oh, my dear guest, please sit here." The Crown Prince, dressed in a uniform and smiling, led the Divine Emperor to an excellent seat. The Divine Emperor and Gold Armor sat down. The Divine Emperor looked calm, but Gold Armor was dumbfounded as he looked at the smiling Crown Prince. How could someone as proud as the Crown Prince integrate into the role of a waiter so easily? "What would you like to eat, my dear guests? There is a menu behind me. I am Xia Yi, a waiter in the restaurant. You can call me Crown Prince. Don't you know what to eat? It doesn't matter. I'll introduce it to you. Sweet and sour ribs, a superb delicacy. It smells like—" The Crown Prince was about to speak. However, he was stopped by the Divine Emperor before he could finish. The Divine Emperor was very satisfied with the Crown Prince's performance. This boy has integrated into the role very quickly. However, he didn't come here for other dishes. He came here for the fried oyster pancake. Ask Owner Bu to order a fried oyster pancake, the Divine Emperor said. The Crown Prince's eyes focused. The Crown Prince's eyes narrowed, and he nodded solemnly. Then, he turned to the window and ordered an oyster pancake. "I don't have fried oyster pancake. It's not a delicacy for sale. Order something else." Bufang's faint voice came from the kitchen. The Crown Prince's face froze. "No? The Divine Emperor wants to eat it, and you dare to say you don't have it?" Why don't you go to heaven, you chef? It's the divine emperor who wants to eat it. Honorbu, please make another dish. The crown prince frowned and reminded the divine emperor. I said I don't have it. If the boss says he doesn't have it, just tell him the truth. Do you want to be stripped again? Bufang's lazy voice rang out from the kitchen again. The crown prince's face turned red. He was almost king angered to death by this chef. The crown prince's face turned slightly unsightly. Well, it's fine if you don't have it. Honorbu, can you tell me when you will make the fried oyster pancake again? Where does the aura of the law of life in the fried oyster pancake come from? The divine emperor's gentle voice rang out. Ting-a-ling. The kitchen curtain was lifted. Bufang walked out. He looked at the divine emperor in surprise. The divine emperor actually cared about the aura of the law of life in the oyster pancake. It was not strong, and it might have come from the oysters soaked in the spring of life. The divine emperor smiled gently at Bufang. However, there was a hint of anxiety in his smile. His anxiety gave Bufang pause. What's the hurry? Rumble! A wave of rumbling suddenly resounded. The divine emperor and many experts' attention was attracted by it. Puzzled, Bufang looked over and saw Hades' Era, who was sitting cross-legged with a pillar of law crashing down from above his head. Has this guy begun to accept the baptism of the power of law? Bufang was a little curious about what law Hades' Era was comprehending. Could it be the law of spicy strips? After all, this guy has eaten so many spicy strips. Rumble! All of a sudden, a strange aura surged out. There seemed to be a golden wheel of law emerging in the sky, and a terrible rumbling sound swept out. Everyone present was stunned. This is the rhythm of comprehending the supreme law of the universe. Hades' Era opened his eyes. He breathed out a long sigh. Around his body there was a strange power of laws spreading out. One after another, wisps of ethereal immortal energy flowed out. Bathed in this energy, Hades' Era opened his mouth and let out an enchanting moan. Gold Armor, who was standing next to the divine emperor, suddenly froze. He rose to his feet with a whoosh. One of the supreme laws of the universe. The law of life? The divine emperor's body tensed up at this moment, and his aura fluctuated. Chapter 1488. The Law of Life? Whether it was the divine emperor or the other courtiers present, they were all shocked. Everyone stared at Hades' Era in disbelief. At this moment, he looked like a peerless immortal. His body was surrounded by wisps of white gas, and with a single thought, he seemed to be able to gush out a mighty life force. Yes, this was indeed the law of life. No one in the Xiai divine dynasty had comprehended the law of life. The law of life was too rare. Even a genius like the crown prince had only comprehended the law of space and the law of destruction. The law of life was the most profound law under the law of transmigration. Everyone present breathed a sigh of relief. Their eyes glowed brightly as they stared at Hades' Era. A demigod had comprehended the law of life. A look of excitement came over Gold Armor's face. He never thought that Hades' Era would comprehend the law of life at this moment. This restaurant is really full of geniuses. Whether it was the black dog lying on the ground, the fox who had eaten the heaven god's blood, or the owner, they are all extraordinary geniuses. Even that woman is a cursed goddess. Bufang looked indifferently at Hades' Era. Bufang was quite surprised. He thought that Hades' Era would comprehend some strange law. The fluctuation of the breakthrough did not last long. Soon, Hades' Era's aura slowly sank. He opened his eyes, which seemed to have white light swirling in them. He stretched, and a crackling sound rang out from his body. He had finally broken through. He, Hades' Era, was now a man who could be called a demigod. Now, he had surpassed his father, Tian-tsang. He was the best. Hades' Era suddenly felt a little strange. One powerful aura after another had sealed his body. Gold Armor, the Divine Emperor, Bufang, the Crown Prince, and the others were all staring at him. He was under a lot of pressure. Hades' era blinked. Were these people jealous of his handsomeness? The law of life? There seemed to be some excitement on the Divine Emperor's old face. This expression caused Hades' era's hair to stand on end. In the Divine Emperor's eyes, Hades' era felt as though he had been stripped of all his clothes. He, Hades' era, was straight, not bent. Your Majesty, please behave yourself. Hades' era was roaring in his heart. It's a pity that you've only begun to comprehend the law of life, and you're only a demigod. Your comprehension of the law of life isn't deep enough, so you can't help me suppress the calamity, the Divine Emperor lamented. The Emperor God walked up to Hades' era and raised his hand. She covered Hades' era's hand with her own. Hades' era narrowed his eyes. In his divine sense, he could only feel a majestic and boundless aura coming towards him. This was the power of a god emperor. This was the aura of a god emperor. Hades' era sucked in a cold breath. He was thoroughly impressed by the old man in front of him. However, Hades' era, who had comprehended the law of life, could feel a black hole spinning in the Divine Emperor's body. The black hole seemed to be devouring everything. It was devouring the Divine Emperor's life force, spirit, and energy. And it seemed to be brewing a terrible calamity. The Divine Emperor withdrew his hand and sighed. He patted Hades' era on the head, then turned his eyes to Bufang. Although Hades' era had comprehended the law of life, the supreme law of the universe, his strength was too weak and useless. In the Divine Emperor's opinion, it was not as effective as Bufang's oyster pancakes. In the entire chaotic universe, in addition to the top heaven god of life, there was also the immortal empress of the immortal spirit divine dynasty who had cultivated the law of life to its peak. However, she could not travel millions of miles to the Xiai divine dynasty to save the divine emperor. After all, as the ruler of the divine dynasty, her every move would trigger terrible changes. The oyster pancake did not contain much of the law of life, but Bufang did not expect that it could suppress the calamity in the divine emperor's body. The surrounding ministers were also incomparably excited. Everyone was staring at Bufang. The divine emperor represented the Xiai divine dynasty. Once he fell, the entire dynasty would fall into a period of decline for at least hundreds of years. This was the most precarious time for the divine dynasty. In the past, at this time, the crown prince should have grown up and could stand on his own. However, the current crown prince, because of his extraordinary talent, was still a demigod and had not broken through to the god realm. Therefore, the divine dynasty was in danger. Whether it was the Titan divine dynasty or the immortal spirit divine dynasty, they could easily seize this opportunity to launch an attack and destroy the Xiai divine dynasty. Of course, once the divine emperor was gone, the current crown prince might not be able to suppress those first-class great worlds under the Xiai divine dynasty's jurisdiction. For example, the Dragon Valley and the Phoenix Nest. If these great worlds rebelled, the Xiai divine dynasty, which had lost its divine emperor, might not be able to withstand it. If Bufang could suppress the divine emperor's calamity, it would be a great merit for the entire Xiai divine dynasty. Bufang was slightly taken aback by this. Swish. Bufang poured a glass of wine. It was the Acheron of helplessness. Brewed with the spring of life, it should contain a stronger aura of life than the oyster pancake. Bufang handed the divine emperor a glass of wine. First, Bufang wanted to confirm if the spring of life was really the reason for suppressing the divine emperor's calamity. Gulp. Without hesitation, the divine emperor poured the wine into his mouth. The wine, which contained a rich aura of life, entered his mouth. Under the gazes of all the officials, the divine emperor shook his head. It's a good wine, but it can't suppress the calamity in my body like the oyster pancake. The divine emperor sighed and smacked his lips. He smacked his lips. The god emperor was also a wine lover. If drinking wine could cure diseases, it would be the best news for the divine emperor. Bufang nodded thoughtfully. It seemed that he could only use the oyster pancake. Perhaps it was because the soaked oysters had purified the law of life? Bufang didn't quite understand. The divine emperor and the others didn't stay in the restaurant for too long. They just came because of the oyster pancake. After learning that there was no oyster pancake, the divine emperor left. After noting down the cooking time of the oyster pancake the next day, he left one after another. Of course, some of the officials still stayed in the restaurant to eat. They only left after they had eaten and drunk enough. The crown prince seemed to be getting more and more comfortable with being a waiter. Perhaps after serving him once, it would be easier for him to accept the second time. In any case, the crown prince was no longer so resistant. Of course, he was still a little proud. Unless he met the divine emperor, the crown prince was always cold and aloof to other diners. He didn't say a word and just quietly did his job as a waiter. It was late at night. The restaurant's door was closed. The crown prince took off his uniform. With a cold face, he indifferently looked at Bufang, who had just walked out of the kitchen. He snorted arrogantly, then turned around and left. When he reached the restaurant's door, he whistled. In the sky, an extremely luxurious warship flew over. As the crown prince, his ship was naturally luxurious and extraordinary. With a swish, the luxurious warship turned into a beam of light, crossing the sky. Bufang was a little speechless as he watched the crown prince leave arrogantly. He had wanted to invite the crown prince to have a meal with him. In that case, he would just forget about it. Turning around and returning to the kitchen, Bufang brought out steaming hot, fragrant, and delicious spicy blood lobsters, placing them on the table. You, Hades-era Lord Go, and the others all gathered around. After eating and drinking, they all went back to their rooms. Those who cultivated went back to cultivate, and those who slept went back to sleep. Time passed slowly like this. Every day, Bufang opened the restaurant and watched the turnover grow. He always felt indescribably comfortable. Because the restaurant was under the divine emperor's protection, no one dared to cause trouble. So sometimes Bufang would cook. When he had nothing to do, he would go to the divine chef temple, where the ancient heaven god's inheritance was sealed, and try to break the seal. However, the next seal was very difficult, and it was basically very difficult for Bufang to break it. Unless his cultivation base broke through to the god realm. Of course, Bufang was not in a hurry. Summer had left. She had left the divine dynasty's capital half a year ago. According to her, she had gone to the ancient heaven god's inheritance to break through to a higher realm. Bufang felt it was a little pity. Summer had been able to show her deterrence in the restaurant. Now that she was gone, Bufang had to face the divine chef temple's elders in person. So, Bufang stayed in the restaurant every day. When he had nothing to do, he leaned against the balcony behind the restaurant and lay down in a rocking chair. Then, he rocked and rocked. Every time the crown prince saw Bufang like this, he would curse Bufang in his heart for not making progress. He regarded losing to Bufang as the shame of his life. He could not believe that he was defeated by such an unambitious guy. After that morning court session, the divine dynasty's divine dynasty was in chaos. A large number of soldiers attacked. Groups of heavy-armored soldiers rushed into the ancient heaven god's inheritance. Some of them landed in the various great worlds around the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. They were searching for the terrible creature that the divine emperor had mentioned. Bufang was also very concerned about this news. After all, it was this creature that separated him from the Lord Go and the others. In the first month of the heavy attack, they didn't gain anything, and no one learned anything about that terrifying creature. However, the divine emperor was not discouraged. Those who were about to face a great tribulation would always feel an inexplicable sense of urgency. So they continued to search. In the second month, they found traces of the creature. A third-class great world around the Xiai divine dynasty had turned into a land of death. All of the living beings fell one after another, leaving behind only strange black spheres. These balls covered the surface of the third-class great world. The divine dynasty's soldiers landed in the great world. They were ambushed. One creature after another, which was very similar to what the divine emperor had described, attacked them. A great battle broke out. This was a unique battle that was extremely tragic. It was a one-sided massacre. In the lair of the horrible creature, a squad of the divine dynasty's soldiers was completely wiped out. The leader, who was left with only one high-grade god, fled back to the Xiai divine dynasty's capital like a madman. This incident caused a commotion in the entire divine dynasty. As soon as the high-grade god returned to the divine dynasty and reported what had happened, his body exploded. There was actually a black ball growing inside his body. When the ball exploded, a terrible creature appeared in the Xiai divine dynasty's court, frantically rushing toward the divine emperor, who was sitting on the throne. However, it was crushed to death by the divine emperor with one finger. The divine emperor's face was full of worry because this was not good news. Meanwhile, the army exploring the ancient heaven god's relic also reported back. There were many experts in the ancient heaven god's relic, and most of them were god kings. So, they had not been wiped out by the horrible creature. However, they were not optimistic. This was because quite a number of god kings had already fallen, the kind where not even their corpses were left. 3 divine dynasties had 3 ancient heaven gods' relic. The moment the news appeared, the divine emperor immediately sent a message to the divine emperors of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the titan divine dynasty. Then, the divine emperors of the 2 divine dynasties said that they had not found such a creature in their territories. Moreover, the 2 divine dynasties had sent emissaries here. The appearance of these emissaries infuriated the divine emperor of the Xiai divine dynasty. In name, they were here to help the Xiai divine dynasty, but in fact, they were here to monitor the situation there. The divine emperor was in his twilight years, and the Xiai divine dynasty was facing a crisis of such a creature. How could the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the titan divine dynasty not be tempted? Year 13,600 of the Xiai calendar. The emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the titan divine dynasty entered the capital. That day dawn had just broken. Bufang opened the restaurant's door. Chapter 1489. Bufang opened the door as usual. It was already dawn. The sun shone down from the sky, exuding a warm and comfortable feeling. It was a wonderful feeling. The first ray of sunshine in the morning always made people feel infinitely better. Bufang was in a good mood. He was ready to start the day's cooking. Today should be another peaceful day. In fact, Bufang quite liked the slow-paced life in the divine dynasty. He felt that everything had become very warm. Outside the door, the crown prince came with disheveled hair, his face extremely serious. In fact, he had long since become familiar with the process of working as a waiter in a restaurant. After changing into his uniform at the door, he slowly stepped into the restaurant. Because it was early in the morning, there were few customers in the restaurant, and many people had not arrived for dinner yet. Therefore, the crown prince seemed a little idle. As time went by, the sun gradually rose, and the restaurant's business gradually boomed. Diners swarmed into the restaurant, and the atmosphere became lively. The diners ordered dishes, the crown prince reported the names of the dishes to Bufang, and Bufang cooked them. Everything was carried out in an orderly manner. The divine dynasty's capital was extremely lively. One after another, warships streaked across the sky and landed on the square with a gust of air gushing out of them. In the square, many high-ranking officials of the Xiai divine dynasty were ready to greet them. The style of these warships was completely different from that of the Xiai divine dynasty. They were from the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty. These two divine dynasties were on par with the Xiai Divine Dynasty in the chaotic universe, and their national strength was prosperous and extremely fearsome. Of course, like the Xiai Divine Dynasty, these divine dynasties also had countless great worlds. This time, it was the emissary groups from the two great worlds who came. They had come to the Xiai Divine Dynasty for an exchange. In fact, the Xiai Divine Emperor did not have a good attitude toward these emissaries. The main reason was that he knew very well that these emissaries were here to find out the situation in the Xiai Divine Dynasty. After all, how could the other two divine dynasties not know that the Divine Emperor's time was coming to an end? The fall of a god emperor would have a huge impact on the structure of the chaotic universe. That was why the two divine dynasties had sent emissaries to learn about the Divine Emperor's condition as soon as possible. Of course, they also wanted to inquire about the strange creature that had frightened the people of the Xiai Divine Dynasty. Even though they knew that these emissaries came with ill intentions, the high-ranking officials of the Xiai Divine Dynasty still followed the Divine Emperor's decree and warmly received them. Boom! With his hands clasped behind his back, King Pingyang stood in the square with many high-ranking officials. In the sky, battleships slowly flew over. A brief moment later, the warship descended and the cabin door opened. Experts that were as ethereal as immortals walked out. They were the people of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. They were dozens of geniuses carefully selected by the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. There were countless great worlds in the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty, and these geniuses were selected from these great worlds. Everyone's strength had been tested. An incomparably talented, monstrous genius. For the Xiai Divine Dynasty, this was not good news. After all, since the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty had sent these geniuses here, it meant that the Xiai Divine Dynasty needed to protect them well. Otherwise, once these geniuses were in danger, the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty would have an excuse to attack the Xiai Divine Dynasty. This situation was not allowed to happen in the Xiai Divine Dynasty, which was in a precarious situation. Therefore, the high-ranking officials and experts of the Xiai Divine Dynasty needed to receive these experts well. However, the two divine dynasties would not be stupid enough to let so many geniuses come to the Xiai Divine Dynasty. Naturally, they also sent experts to follow them. Finally, the ones who came out of the warships were the experts who were responsible for protecting the geniuses of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. They were a high-grade God King and several mid-grade God Kings. The high-grade God King looked like an old man, but he was not the kind of old man who had one foot in the grave. His clothes were meticulously dressed, and his hair was neatly combed. He stood where he was like a straight spear. King Pingyang and the others met these emissaries. The two sides talked and laughed, and they reached a friendly consensus. After that, the geniuses of the Titan Divine Dynasty slowly appeared. One bare-chested expert after another walked out of the Titan Divine Dynasty's warship. The geniuses of the Titan Divine Dynasty were all naked, and their bodies were covered with strange patterns. They looked like barbarians, and in fact, their customs were also inclined to the barbaric style. The weapons in their hands were all made of bones, which were somewhat similar to the heaven god bones of the Lord Go. Like the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty, the experts who came were all geniuses of the Divine Dynasty, and they were guarded by a high-grade God King and many mid-grade God Kings. After the three sides had a friendly exchange, the emissaries entered the Divine Dynasty's capital and settled down there. Undercurrents were surging in the various aristocratic families, and they all visited and befriended these geniuses of the Divine Dynasty. As time went by, these monstrous geniuses became restless in the imperial capital. These monstrous geniuses were all proud and arrogant people. Their strength was powerful, and they surpassed all levels. In the capital, they challenged the younger generation of the Xiai Divine Dynasty. Many heirs of the aristocratic families and kings couldn't escape the challenge. The geniuses of the Xiai divine dynasty were also proud. Naturally, they wouldn't refuse. After a few challenges, however, they ended up with a shocking result. The geniuses of the Xiai divine dynasty were all defeated. This was simply unacceptable to the Xiai divine dynasty. The heirs of the aristocratic families were also dumbfounded and lost. This battle had completely made the geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty go wild. The Titan divine dynasty and the immortal spirit divine dynasty even made bets while talking and laughing, competing on winning streak. They didn't take the geniuses of the Xiai divine dynasty seriously at all. The whole Xiai divine dynasty was enveloped in a foul atmosphere. Not only did the divine emperor not stop this situation, but he also didn't intervene. He seemed to have the idea of training the younger generation of the divine dynasty. This made the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty even more wild. Bam! A figure fell from the sky and smashed down hard. The Zhao family's skyscraper Zhao Wuhan smashed hard into the square in front of the skyscraper. An uproar broke out around the square, and all the onlookers fell silent. The heir of the Zhao family was also defeated. In the sky, an ethereal man who looked like an immortal smiled faintly. He was holding a sword and dressed in a white veil. His face was extremely handsome, and he looked like a peerless sword immortal, ethereal and otherworldly. Many women in the surroundings were attracted by this man. He's too strong. The young marquis of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, Fang Wuji, defeated Zhao Wuhan in 10 moves. They're not on the same level at all. Although they're both exceptional demigods, I estimate that Fang Wuji is at the level of a young master. A young master? What a joke. Yesterday, Fang Wuji cut off the crown of King Tianlong's son with a sword. A young master like him is no match for Fang Wuji. Murmurs rang out in the surroundings. The immortal-like man in the sky smiled faintly. He flicked his finger. The sword buzzed, soared into the sky, and returned to its sheath. His sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes shone with melancholy, causing countless girls to scream. I'm a little disappointed. Are the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty so weak? Fang Wuji clasped his hands behind his back, a touch of melancholy on his face. Brother Wuji, it's time to go. The next opponent is Luo Hui of the Luo family. I heard he's a genius who comprehended the supreme law of the universe. He's enough for you to fight and extend your streak of 15 consecutive victories, said a woman with picturesque features. Down below, a woman with a picturesque appearance and fine black hair that flowed down like a waterfall spoke softly, and she wore an ancient-style dress. She was exuding an immortal aura. Many people were intoxicated by the immortal aura. This Luo Hui does have some ability. I heard that Tai Tu of the Titan Divine Dynasty was defeated by him. Fang Wuji landed. He completely ignored Zhao Wuhan, who was lying on the ground with a dull look in his eyes. In his eyes, a loser was not worthy of his attention. The surrounding experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty sneered as they looked at Zhao Wuhan, who was lying in the ruins. The heir of the Zhao family is just SOSO. The people of the immortal spirit divine dynasty hurried toward the Luo family's residence. Zhao Wuhan got up from the ground and sighed. He was defeated in 10 moves. Fang Wuji was really strong. The latter did not comprehend the supreme law of the universe and only relied on his sword intent. However, it was fused with dozens of ordinary laws, and the power of his sword energy was comparable to that of a god king. Before the sword intent, Zhao Wuhan's law of devour was like paper. Although Luo Hui was strong, he might not be able to stop it. Zhao Wuhan felt a little frustrated. Almost all the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty was going to be defeated. Was there really no one who could stop these fellows? This was a matter of national humiliation. Even some of the young masters who had broken through to the god realm were no match for these geniuses. Why was the gap between them so big? Zhao Wuhan was a little confused. In the Luo family, the battle did not last long. Soon, it came to an end. Luo Sanyang looked in disbelief at the scene in the distance. Her genius brother was actually forced to his knees by a man from the immortal spirit divine dynasty with one sword strike. How was that possible? Luo Hui had comprehended the supreme law of the universe. In the Luo family's residence, the ground was cracked. Luo Hui's hair was disheveled as he knelt on the ground in a daze. With his body as the center, the ground around him was covered in dense sword qi. The sword qi was filled with the terrifying power of laws. If Fang Wuji hadn't held back, he might have been killed by the sword strike. Is Fang Wuji, the young marquis, so strong? Luo Hui raised his head numbly and glanced at Fang Wuji in the distance. Brother Luo Hui, your strength is not bad. It's a pity that your foundation is not solid enough. I heard that you are the best of the younger generation in the Xiaoyi divine dynasty, but I'm a little disappointed. Fang Wuji sighed, wiped his sword with a light gauze, and sighed. Luo Hui's face was unsightly. Luo Sanyang clenched her fists, wishing she could punch this guy. He's too pretentious. Does he really think no one in the Xiaoyi divine dynasty can stop them? If it weren't for the fact that she was no match for Fang Wuji, she would have attacked him directly. The Crown Prince and young Master Ping Yang haven't made a move yet. If they do, you won't be able to win at all, Luo Hui said as he stood up from the ground, his face slightly pale. Naturally, his momentum could not be weak. Oh? The Crown Prince and young Master Ping Yang. I heard that these two are the top existences of the younger generation? Fang Wuji stopped wiping his sword. Wrong, they are not the top existences. The top one, he. Luo Sanyang said with a sneer in the distance. Fang Wuji glanced at her and breathed out a mouthful of sword energy. Then, with his hands clasped behind his back, he drifted into the distance. No matter what, I, Fang Wuji, have won this battle and extended my 15th winning streak. As for the Crown Prince and young Master Ping Yang, I will challenge them myself. I hope they won't disappoint me too much. The geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty drifted away. The group of people left into the distance and disappeared in a short while. Luo Hui's face was pale. Tai Fei of the Titan Divine Dynasty has won 15 consecutive victories, and so has Fang Wuji. Our Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty has really lost face this time. Luo Sanyang sighed as well. I hope the Crown Prince and the others can stop these guys' winning streak. After learning about the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty's current situation, the two relatively gentle divine dynasties finally revealed their ferocious claws and fangs. It's time for young Master Ping Yang to come out of seclusion. Otherwise, these guys will soon enter the ancient heaven god's relic. At that time, these disgraces will never be washed away. As for the Crown Prince, alas! Luo Hui sighed with emotion. After being honed in Bufang's restaurant, the Crown Prince had long lost his edge. He was no longer the genius Crown Prince who no one dared to look at when he was in high spirits. Without his edge, a genius would no longer be considered a genius. However, Luo Hui thought of the man in the restaurant the Crown Prince served. His body trembled slightly, and he wished that man could make a move. In terms of showing off, even 10 Fang Wujis would not be his match. In the Luo family's skyscraper in the restaurant on the top floor, Bu Fang was lying leisurely in a rocking chair, basking in the warm sun. Hades Era, on the other hand, was chatting with Luo Sanyang's best friends in the restaurant with a spicy strip dangling from his mouth. The Crown Prince sat in the restaurant with a dark face. There were no customers now, so he looked a little leisurely. However, he was really fed up with the guy in the distance who kept bragging with a spicy strip dangling from his mouth. Isn't he just comprehending an incomplete law of life? Does he really think he's the god of life? Ridiculous! The Crown Prince breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he closed his eyes slightly. Suddenly, The Crown Prince opened his eyes, focused his gaze, and looked outside the door of the restaurant. Over there, a group of people walked slowly toward the restaurant. The leader was a handsome man shrouded in immortal energy and looked like a banished immortal. He carried a sword on his back. Although he looked gentle, his aura was overbearing. The man glanced outside the restaurant. Then, he stepped into the restaurant. "The menu is behind you. Tell me what you want to eat," the Crown Prince said with a straight face. Hiss, however, as soon as the Crown Prince's voice rang out, the man carrying the sword sneered. "The Crown Prince? The Crown Prince of the Shui divine dynasty is actually a waiter? No wonder the younger generation of the Shui divine dynasty is as weak as dogs." Chapter 1490. The Crown Prince? No wonder the younger generation of the Shui divine dynasty is as weak as a dog. A faint sneer filled with disdain resounded. The Crown Prince, sitting in a chair, froze. He slowly raised his head and looked sharply at the man standing in front of the restaurant. What did this guy say? Under the path understanding tree, Lord Dog slowly opened his eyes. His eyes opened a slit, and a bright light shot out from his eyes. "I heard that someone said a dog is weak. Who did a dog offend?" Fang Wuji looked at the Crown Prince, not hiding the disappointment on his face. He had sent someone to investigate, and to his surprise, he learned that the Crown Prince of the Shui divine dynasty was working as a waiter in a restaurant. The Crown Prince was working as a waiter? Was this a joke? The Crown Prince's status was high, and yet he was working as a waiter in a barren restaurant? How ridiculous! At the thought of this, Fang Wuji felt that this so-called Crown Prince was no threat at all. As an expert, he naturally had to have the dignity of an expert. Working as a waiter was tantamount to abandoning one's sharp and aggressive heart. Such a Crown Prince was nothing to be afraid of. The figure of the immortal spirit divine dynasty's Crown Prince emerged in Fang Wuji's mind. That Crown Prince was the real top genius of the chaotic universe. In the demigod realm, he had not only comprehended the supreme laws of the universe, but also comprehended nearly 200 ordinary laws, which was close to the level of a mid-grade god-king. In terms of realm and strength, he could be called the number one genius. It was said that the current Crown Prince of the Shui divine dynasty was the strongest genius, but after seeing him with his own eyes, he realized that his reputation was undeserved. How could a waiter be called the strongest genius? Ridiculous! Fang Wuji and the many experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty stepped into the restaurant. They found seats and sat down. They glanced around the restaurant. It was an ordinary restaurant with a good location. However, this was not the reason for the Crown Prince to come here. It was said that the Crown Prince was defeated by the chef of this restaurant, so he came here? As the Crown Prince, he was defeated by a chef? A chef's major must be the culinary path. How much could the culinary path add to one's fighting strength? It was a great humiliation for the Crown Prince to be defeated by a chef. Fang Wuji sat on the chair with a faint sneer on his face. In the distance, Hades' Era held a spicy strip in his mouth. He stopped bragging to Luo Sanyang's close friends and narrowed his eyes at Fang Wuji. This guy was very handsome and cool. As soon as they entered the restaurant, they seemed to steal away a lot of Hades' Era's limelight. How could this be tolerated? Hades' Era glanced at DZ. DZ was provoking little DZ, and little DZ definitely wouldn't be able to tolerate it. When they started fighting, there would be a good show to watch. Bufang Young Man's restaurant has been too ordinary these days. It's not interesting at all. Hades' Era felt a little tired after bragging to girls all day long. Waiter, come here to order. Fang Wuji smiled and glanced at the Crown Prince. Aren't you a waiter? Then I'll let you serve me well. With the Crown Prince of the Shui divine dynasty as a waiter, he could brag about it for a whole year when he returned. It just so happened that he could make the younger generation of the Shui divine dynasty lose face. Didn't those stubborn youngsters of the Shui divine dynasty place their hopes on their crown prince? Then let them have a good look at how the crown prince grovels in front of them. The corners of Fang Wuji's mouth curved upward, and he felt a surge of pleasure in his heart. Come, everyone, sit down. Let's have a good experience of the crown prince's service. Ah! Fang Wuji burst out laughing. The surrounding experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty laughed as well. The beautiful woman's long eyelashes fluttered. She glanced at the crown prince, covered her mouth, and chuckled. She looked quite charming. The crown prince raised his eyebrows. Oh? This guy is arrogant, isn't he? Although the crown prince stayed in Bufang's restaurant, he was, after all, the crown prince. But he was, after all, the crown prince, and he had heard about everything that had happened in the divine dynasty. The emissaries of the immortal spirit divine dynasty and the Titan divine dynasty had challenged the younger generation of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. They had completely crushed the younger generation of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. At first, the crown prince didn't take it seriously, but now it seemed that the other party was really too arrogant. He even dared to show off in front of him. Who gave him the courage to do so? He only worked as a waiter to cultivate his moral character. Otherwise, with his hot temper, he would have killed this guy in seconds. The crown prince narrowed his eyes and stood where he was. He didn't move. Fang Wuji frowned. The next moment, his divine sense surged. The sharp sword on his back was unsheathed in an instant. A clanging sound rang out. In an instant, the restaurant was filled with sword light. Fang Wuji's sword was pressed against the crown prince's throat. Come on, give me a chance to defeat you fair and square. Otherwise, I won't feel any sense of accomplishment after defeating the crown prince, and I'll be very disappointed. Fang Wuji sneered. The geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty also laughed. Looking at the long sword at his throat, the crown prince smiled. Interesting. How dare he fight in the restaurant? Newborn calves are really fearless. The crown prince reached out a hand and gently flicked his finger on the tip of Fang Wuji's sword. With a ding, a buzzing sound rang out, and the restaurant began to tremble. Fang Wuji's eyes narrowed, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. A terrible sword intent erupted at this moment. If you don't answer, I'll take it as a yes, Fang Wuji said. The next moment, his aura suddenly erupted. The crown prince looked at Fang Wuji as if he were looking at a fool. As Fang Wuji's aura erupted, the restaurant in the kitchen also seemed to sense something. Ting-a-ling. The curtain was lifted. Then, Bufang walked out of the restaurant and shook the water off his hands. He glanced indifferently at Fang Wuji, who was holding a sword against the crown prince's throat. He twitched the corner of his mouth. When the crown prince saw Bufang, he raised his hands and took a step back to show that he had done nothing. Buzz in the kitchen, a rumble suddenly rang out, and then a figure shot out in an instant. Fang Wuji's face froze. Not only him, but a group of people from the immortal spirit divine dynasty also turned to look. Outside the restaurant, a group of people had already gathered. They were all onlookers who had been attracted by Fang Wuji and the others. Some were the heirs of aristocratic families who had been defeated, and some were young masters. They looked at the scene in the restaurant with complicated expressions. Is the crown prince so scared that he doesn't dare to speak? Alas, when had the Shui divine dynasty ever suffered such humiliation? Rumble. A palm the size of a cattail leaf fan slammed toward Fang Wuji's head. Fang Wuji's mind instantly became vigilant. A sword swept out, and a dazzling sword light burst out. It flew toward the palm. What's that? Fang Wuji said coldly. How dare you sneak attack me? You're courting death. A clanging sound rang out. Fang Wuji only felt a huge force erupt. He stood up from his seat and took a step back. His expression changed slightly. There, a figure gradually emerged. It turned out to be a chubby and somewhat adorable iron puppet. When the crown prince saw Xiao Bai, The corners of his mouth curved upward. Troublemaker! You will be stripped as an example to others. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed as he looked at Feng Wuji. Stripped? The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were stunned, and then they sneered. With Feng Wuji here, who would dare to strip them? Besides, they were members of the emissary group of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. Who would dare to strip them? Weren't they afraid of being punished? How could the current Xiaoyi divine dynasty dare to offend the immortal spirit divine dynasty? If the divine emperor of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty was in his heyday, they might restrain themselves a little, but the divine emperor's life was coming to an end. What were they afraid of? In the chaotic universe, experts were the rules. Even if one wanted to strip someone, one must have the strength to do so. A mere iron puppet dared to say such a thing? Feng Wuji sneered as well. His sword was hungry and thirsty. Although his opponent was just a puppet, he still felt a rare sense of excitement. That's right, this lump of metal puppet might be a formidable opponent for him. He might be able to fight to his heart's content. It had been a long time since he had fought to his heart's content. Come on. Let's fight. With a sword in hand, the world is mine. The corners of Feng Wuji's mouth curved into a smile. The next moment, he took a step forward and shot forward like a dragon. Roar. His sword was like a dragon's roar. In the distance, a look of sympathy came over the crown prince's face. Isn't it better to wear clothes? He murmured in his heart. With a spicy strip dangling from his mouth, Hades' Era rubbed his hands excitedly, his eyes shining brightly. Behind Era, the group of girlfriends all widened their eyes like wolves. They seemed to be able to enjoy the beautiful scenery again. Bufang shook his head speechlessly. Xiao Bai was a professional at stripping clothes. His sword energy was like a dragon. Feng Wuji's cultivation base was indeed formidable. As soon as he thrust his sword, it turned into thousands of sword lights that kept bursting out in the restaurant. The sword went straight toward Xiao Bai. As for the crown prince, he had long been ignored by Feng Wuji. This crown prince is nothing to worry about. I'll deal with him after I get rid of this puppet. His winning streak couldn't stop like this. After all, he was going to compete with Tai Fei. Rumble. Facing Feng Wuji's sword, Xiao Bai, on the other hand, calmly threw out a palm. The sword and the palm collided. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were very excited. They felt that they would soon be able to see this iron puppet being cut into pieces. Bam! The fan-like hand was like a huge dragon charging forward, shattering the sword chi and directly grabbing Feng Wuji's head. Rip! A crisp sound of clothes being torn rang out. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed as he gently tossed his hand up. The corner of the crown prince's mouth curled up. The spicy strip in Hades' Era's mouth trembled. The eyes of the girls in the group of girlfriends suddenly lit up. The geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were shocked. F***ck. A figure flew out of the restaurant. What was flying in the air was a torn piece of silk and gauze. A white figure was thrown out of the air, drew a beautiful arc in the air, and fell to the ground outside the restaurant. Feng Wuji was a little confused. He felt a chill all over his body. What happened? What is he doing? Where is he? Feng Wuji got up from the ground. His pupils constricted, and when he looked down, he saw that he was naked from head to toe. He, Feng Wuji, who had won 15 matches in a row, was actually stripped naked? Behind Hades' Era, the women in the group of girlfriends looked at Feng Wuji's body and suddenly sighed, their faces revealing a dull expression. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were also in disbelief. Then, they all lowered their heads and whispered to each other. A blush appeared on the face of that indescribably beautiful woman, making her even more beautiful and moving. She spat to herself and called him a hooligan. Feng Wuji's ears were ringing and he felt dizzy. The next moment, he came to his senses. It was as if he was about to explode. Damn it! Damn it! What kind of lousy restaurant is this? Break it with one sword strike. Fang Wuji was furious. He was embarrassed in front of his goddess, stripped naked, and his secrets were exposed. For him, this was a great humiliation. Rumble! All the power of the law spread. A terrible sword intent swept across the place, rolling and surging. In the restaurant, the crown prince's eyes flashed, and a cold glint swept out. You're courting death. The crown prince unbuttoned a button on his uniform. He was about to go out of the restaurant and strike. However, as soon as he unbuttoned it, he was stopped by Bufang. It's business time. Calm down. Don't take off your clothes so easily, Bufang said. The crown prince froze. So the point is to take off my clothes? Era 5 spicy strip. I'll leave that swordsman to you. I'll give you 2 hours to teach him a lesson, Bufang said, playing with his fingers. He looked expressionlessly at Era, who was holding a spicy strip in his mouth. 2 hours? Are you looking down on I? Please give I an hour. I will teach him how to teach him a lesson. Chapter 1491. Give I half an hour, and I will definitely kill him, Hades Era said with a spicy strip in his mouth. The crown prince was speechless. The women in the group of girlfriends screamed. Was their Prince Charming finally going to show his skills? In their eyes, their god of life was even more majestic and valiant than the crown prince. Boom! You're courting death. Fang Wuji was cold and ruthless. After flying into a rage out of humiliation, he exploded. His sword was the all-things sword. His way of the sword was to wipe out everything that stood in his way. The crown prince stopped attacking. Strictly speaking, he should be the one to attack. However, since Bufang wanted Hades Era to attack, he would just wait and see. If it didn't work out, he would make his move. With the spicy strip in his mouth, Hades Era slowly walked out. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hades Era stood in front of the restaurant. His terrible sword intent was surging, and countless streams of sword energy were swirling, turning into a huge sword that stretched across the sky. The sword slashed toward the restaurant. At the top of the Luo family's building, it seemed to cut the whole building in half. Hades Era stood still, his eyes flashing. Then, his body shot up into the sky like a spring. He didn't dodge, colliding with the sword energy. Ah! A groan rang out. Hades Era, who had shot up into the sky, was hit by the sword, and his body fell to the ground. The ground shook. Everyone was shocked. One sword strike? Fang Wuji was stunned. He thought Hades Era was strong. Didn't he say that he would compete with him in swordsmanship? How could he be defeated by one sword strike? The women in the group of girlfriends widened their eyes and came to an abrupt stop. The cheers in their mouths were only halfway through. He was defeated just like that? Didn't he say that he would last for half an hour? The crown prince rubbed his face speechlessly. Sure enough, that guy was here to make fun of him. What kind of trash is this? How dare you provoke me? Fang Wuji floated in the sky and sneered. He had 3 swords, but he had only used the first one, and that bastard could not even take it. Yet, he still dared to say that he could defeat him in an hour. It was simply ridiculous. Had the Xiaoyi divine dynasty been reduced to relying on these grandstanding fellows to keep up appearances? Voila! Suddenly, rubble rolled down from the roof of the building. A figure stood up from the ruins. Hades Era flipped his hair and tidied it up. I wasn't ready, so I let you stab me again, Era said. He bent his body slightly and stomped on the ground. Bang! Hades Era soared into the sky again. I have a slut, please enlighten me, Era roared. Fang Wuji's eyes narrowed. To be able to take a strike from him and remain unscathed, this person must be extraordinary. The surrounding people were also in an uproar. He could still fight. This was out of everyone's expectations. Interesting. With his hands clasped behind his back, The crown prince looked at the battle in the sky with a look of interest. Fang Wuji dared not to be careless. Sword intent swept out from all over him. A sword that breaks mountains and rivers. Fang Wuji's pupils constricted. His sword intent gathered on his sword and swept it out. A clanging sound rang out as the sword went out, destroying heaven and earth. Slash. The sword slashed down. The power of this strike was extremely fearsome. Luo Hui was defeated by this strike. Rumble. The whole Luo family's skyscraper seemed to be shaking. The violent shaking made the hearts of all present tremble slightly. The void exploded. Turbulence kept flowing under the sword. There was no doubt that the power of Fang Wuji's strike had reached at least the level of a perfected god. After all, he was a genius demigod of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. The power of his strike was extremely terrifying. Swoosh! Up in the sky, a figure was sent flying backward. With a thud, he smashed into the ground. Ah! Another round of screams rang out. Nether King Erha crawled up from the ground one more time. He rubbed his chest, holding the spicy strip in his mouth. Haven't you eaten? Please use more strength. Era said. The surrounding people were dumbfounded. Even the crown prince was stunned. This guy is so resistant? Does the law of life have such an effect? Is this how the law of life is used? Fang Wuji's face twitched, and his eyes grew more and more serious. He's still unscathed. This is unbelievable, again. Fang Wuji was infuriated. He didn't believe that his sword couldn't hurt this guy. A sword fell from the sky. Buzz, a misty sword light blotted out the sky. The power of this strike became more and more terrifying. Hades' Era stood where he was. His hair fluttered in the wind, and his aura grew stronger and stronger. Then, the law of life spread. Shao Chen leaped high into the air like a star, radiating an aura of life from the inside out, looking extremely resplendent. Boom! Fang Wuji's sword swept out. Instantly, it was like a moving galaxy. Tens of thousands of sword lights descended, smashing on Nether King Erha's body. Erha let out a groan as his body was constantly bombarded. However, under the healing of the law of life, he was unscathed. Hit me, Hades' Era said, staring at Fang Wuji. Haven't you eaten? Use more strength. Hades' Era seemed to be roaring with the law of life. Fang Wuji's mind trembled, and his hand holding the sword seemed to be unstable. Is this guy so fierce? Swish, swish, swish. Fang Wuji raised his sword again. Countless sword lights slashed down in the void. The void shattered inch by inch. A terrible aura of destruction swept out, filling heaven and earth. In a flash, Hades' Era was enveloped by the destructive sword energy. Fang Wuji took a deep breath. This sword could be considered as his strongest sword move. Buzz, the sword light dissipated. Hades' Era's body was covered with sword marks, and blood seemed to be splashing from the wounds. However, the wounds were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Hit me. Use more strength. Your sword is my bitch. Nether King Erha roared. His eyes widened as he let out a roar. His eyes were bloodshot. The power of law above his head kept swirling. Hiss, this guy is so tough? Even Fang Wuji's law of sword path can't completely kill this guy with one strike? Also, this guy really deserves a beating. Fang Wuji seemed to have a psychological shadow and began to doubt his life. Every time he thought he was going to hack this guy to death, he would still stand up energetically. It happened again and again, and Fang Wuji was a little scared. His sword intent, which could suppress the heirs of aristocratic families with one strike, couldn't kill this guy in front of him. The law of life, Fang Wuji sucked in a cold breath when he sensed Nether King Erha's power of law. The law of life was a law that only the Empress of the immortal spirit divine dynasty comprehended. Once the Empress's law appeared, a dead great world could be revived in an instant. This guy in front of him had also mastered the law of life. But since when could the law of life make its possessor immortal? No matter how hard he attacked, he couldn't kill this guy. How could he fight? His hand, which was holding the sword, was shaking. Hades' era approached step by step. Finally, he was in front of Fong Wuji. I have a big spicy strip. As he approached Fong Wuji, Nether King Ha instantly tore his throat, letting out a loud roar. Fong Wuji! What is this guy shouting about? Fong Wuji's pupils constricted. Then, he found that a huge, black, brick-like object had appeared in Hades' era's hand. Is this the so-called Big Spicy Strip? Fong Wuji froze. Then, he realized that the pitch-black brick-like spicy strip was smashing toward his head. With a loud bang, the black chilly strip smashed into Fong Wuji's head with a crushing force. Bam! Fong Wuji suddenly felt dizzy, and his body was forcefully smashed down from the sky. He hit the ground hard. A rumbling sound rang out. The ground caved in. The onlookers were dumbfounded. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were dumbfounded. Fong Wuji was knocked down. He was smashed down by a brick. No, a spicy strip. It was supposed to be a fierce battle, but why did it become so strange and funny? What the hell was a big spicy strip? In midair, the clothes on Nether King Ha's body were torn by the sword energy, turning into strips of cloth. Ha grabbed the clothes in front of him with both hands, and with a ripping sound, he tore them apart. A man with spicy strips is mighty and majestic. Hades' era roared in midair. The onlookers were speechless. Bufang was speechless. Rumble on the ground, smoke and dust billowed away. Fong Wuji stood where he was, holding his sword. He felt a little dizzy. That spicy strip was a divine artifact. The power of one blow was so terrifying. Suddenly, Fong Wuji raised his head. Above his head, a black dot was getting bigger and bigger in his hazy vision. The next moment, Era descended from the sky with the spicy strip in his hand. The chilly strip, which was wrapped in a terrifying force, ruthlessly smashed onto Fong Wuji's head. Bam! Time seemed to stand still at this moment. A crack rang out. The brick hit Fong Wuji's head and slowly broke into two halves. A stream of blood gushed out of Fong Wuji's forehead and slowly flowed down, blurring his vision. I'm bleeding? Fong Wuji said blankly. Then, a violent dizziness came over him. Fong Wuji raised his sword and pointed it at Hades' era. A clanging sound rang out. The sword fell to the ground. Fong Wuji fell to the ground. His divine sense stopped working, and he fainted. Fong Wuji, the genius demigod of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, the record holder of 15 consecutive victories, was defeated by a spicy strip. Hades' era flipped his hair. Although the spicy strip he made could not be eaten, it was absolutely qualified as a weapon. He grimaced in pain for a while. Even with the law of life, Hades' era still felt a stabbing pain in his body. He had suffered too much damage, and he needed time to digest it. He almost couldn't hold on any longer. It hurt so King much. Eyes delicate skin. Hades' era shivered for a while, then looked at the crown prince in the direction of the restaurant. Little Emperor, it's your turn. Eyes lowliness is your lowliness. Hades' era returned to the restaurant, shivering. The crown prince rolled his eyes. Why did such a transcendent law of life turn into the law of rascals? What a waste of this precious law of life. I've followed the wrong master. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty dashed out like crazy. They landed beside Fong Wuji. Blood dripped from Fong Wuji's forehead. Fortunately, he had only fainted, which made the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty breathe a sigh of relief. Fong Wuji, who had won 15 consecutive victories, was defeated. Why do I feel a little unwilling to lose? Bufang looked at Hades' era, who was walking back into the restaurant. The corner of his mouth twitched involuntarily. He looked at the time. Bufang yawned and said to the crown prince, "Business hours are over. You're free to do whatever you want from now on." After that, He clasped his hands behind his back and went back into the kitchen. Business hours are over? The corner of the Crown Prince's mouth twitched slightly. He raised his hand and unbuttoned his uniform one by one. His eyes were cold as he stared at the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty outside the door. His hand shook. The void was torn apart. A golden dragon knife fell into his hand. The dragon soul knife appeared, and a dragon roar soared into the sky. Holding the knife, the Crown Prince walked step by step toward the group of talented demigods of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. He glanced at the group of geniuses. The Crown Prince curved his lips disdainfully. I've never been afraid of anyone except that stinking chef. All of you, come at me together. Chapter 1492. Hades' era had defeated Feng Wuji. This news was a blow to those geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. Feng Wuji was not the strongest among them, but he was the most active. Among the emissaries who came here, Feng Wuji's strength could only rank second. As for the strongest, it was a prince of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. That prince did not like to participate in such fights. Therefore, now that Feng Wuji was defeated, it was basically difficult for them to get back at him. However, the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were unwilling to accept this, because, to be honest, the person who defeated Feng Wuji didn't use actual strength to defeat Feng Wuji. The reason why Feng Wuji lost was that he was killed by AB*TCH. That was right. He was killed by AB*TCH. In terms of strength, Feng Wuji crushed that guy. However, after comprehending the law of life, that guy's resilience was too strong, and he killed Feng Wuji with AB*TCH. Therefore, the geniuses of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were a little aggrieved. Feng Wuji had fallen unconscious and was carried on their back. How could they tolerate this? And now, the waiter of the restaurant was so arrogant that he asked them to attack him together. He was completely looking down on them. The Crown Prince looked indifferently at this group of people. There was a faint disdain on his face. He might have behaved obscenely in Bufang's restaurant, but that was because he knew very well how terrifying it was. Not to mention Xiao Bai, who was good at stripping clothes. Just the black dog lying under the path understanding tree was not something he dared to provoke. When the bone smashed him, the Crown Prince felt that he might doubt his life. However, he was, after all, the extremely arrogant Crown Prince. As the Crown Prince, he naturally had his own confidence and arrogance. The immortal spirit divine dynasty? Crush the younger generation of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty? The Crown Prince held the extreme Emperor Dragon Soul blade in his hand as he walked forward step by step. His aura kept increasing, and with every step he took, his aura seemed to break through the clouds. It was extremely terrifying. Like climbing a stairway to heaven, the Crown Prince walked out of the restaurant. His aura climbed up the stairway and reached the clouds. The Dragon Soul knife had lost its dragon soul. However, in terms of quality, it was still a top divine artifact. Holding the knife, a terrible aura almost crushed all the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty present. A genius demigod from the immortal spirit divine dynasty narrowed his eyes. The Crown Prince of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty, since Feng Wuji had fainted, then let him experience it for himself. Boom! The expert took a step forward, and his figure instantly rushed in front of the Crown Prince like a dragon. His body was as ethereal as an immortal. He stretched out his hand, intending to strike the Crown Prince's face. The Dharch held the dragon saber with an expressionless face. He tilted his head slightly, looked at the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, and grinned. A sense of disdain burst forth from him. "Are you looking down on me?" the Crown Prince said. Grabbing the knife with one hand, the dragon knife swept out, and the knife light suddenly cut down. The expert of the immortal spirit divine dynasty let out a miserable howl, and the power of law in him did not even break out. He was sent flying and fell miserably on the ground. How dare you challenge me when you haven't even comprehended a supreme law of the universe? Who gave you the courage? The crown prince carried the dragon saber. He looked down from above and said indifferently. The expert whose palm had been cut off immediately let out a miserable howl. His palm had been cut off and blood kept flowing. However, he was, after all, a demigod and he could still recover his body. However, he still looked miserable at the moment. Cutting off your palm is a lesson for you, the crown prince said lightly. He walked forward step by step. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were even more frightened, and they all retreated. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty felt even more frightened and retreated one after another. Fang Wuji grunted and woke up from his coma. As soon as he woke up, he let out a furious roar. He couldn't believe that he was knocked out by a spicy strip. It was a great humiliation for him to be knocked out by a spicy strip. How could he bear such a humiliation? That guy's fighting capacity was obviously much weaker than his. Boom! The sword on his back flew out with a buzzing sound like a drop of water. In the distance, the crown prince grinned and looked indifferently at Fang Wuji, who was soaring into the sky. It was this guy who shouted the loudest before. A beam of sword light fell from the sky. Then, it rushed toward the crown prince. However, the immortal-like sword energy that filled the sky was torn apart. The crown prince's knife energy slashed out like a dragon, possessing the power to destroy heaven and earth. With one slash, it could destroy everything. Fang Wuji's expression changed. Holding the sword, Lin Fan leaped out from the void. The crown prince was not Hades' era. That guy had extraordinary resilience because he had comprehended the law of life. In terms of fighting capacity, Fang Wuji could kill him in seconds. However, the crown prince in front of him, Fang Wuji felt the pressure. This was the first time he had felt pressure among his peers in the Xiai divine dynasty. This is the battle I want. Fang Wuji took a deep breath, his eyes full of fighting spirit. Rumble! In the distance, a warship came over from the void. Several figures walked out of the warship. The geniuses of the Titan Divine Dynasty also appeared. The Titan Divine Dynasty's experts were all bare-chested and looked extremely tough. Each of them looked as if they had walked out of the wilderness. Their leader, however, was a skinny teenager. His upper body was naked, and his lower body was wrapped in tiger skin. Carrying a bone axe on his back, he stared at the battle on the top of the Luo family's skyscraper with clear eyes. The Titan Divine Dynasty's genius is here too. That's Tai Fei, the one whose battle record is not weaker than Fang Wuji's. I heard that no one has forced him to use his axe so far. The people around them started to murmur. Everyone's face was filled with excitement. The appearance of the Titan Divine Dynasty's experts made the battle much more interesting and lively. The Xiui Divine Dynasty's crown prince? I wonder if he can force me to use my Titan Divine axe. With the bone axe on his back, Tai Fei smiled faintly. The battle between Fang Wuji and the crown prince broke out. Fang Wuji did not comprehend the supreme law of the universe, but he had comprehended dozens of laws, including some high-level laws. Moreover, all of them assisted him with the law of the sword path, which made his sword extremely powerful. Of course, it was a humiliation for him to be defeated by Hades' era. He could only wash away this humiliation with a victory. And the crown prince in front of him was the best choice. Rumble! He raised his sword. Thousands of sword beams pierced through the void and shot toward the crown prince. Facing Fang Wuji's attack, the crown prince did not dodge. However, the crown prince did not dodge Fang Wuji's attack at all. The void around the crown prince was twisting. Fang Wuji's sword beams were diverted to other places in the twisted void. When Fang Wuji's sword energy attacked the distorted void, it would be diverted to another place. The law of space, the law of space. In the distance, Tai Fei narrowed his eyes. They all knew that the Xiai divine dynasty's crown prince had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe. They also wanted to feel how strong an existence who had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe was. Bam! 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 The void exploded. Fang Wuji's figure floated out. Holding his sword, he was full of fighting spirit. Like a ghost, he kept disappearing, reappearing, disappearing, and reappearing. Every swing of his sword contained the power of dozens of laws, which made him very powerful. The power of his sword was also extremely strong. The Crown Prince's face was indifferent. Have you had enough fun? The Crown Prince twitched his mouth. If you have, then let's end this. Suddenly, the dragon knife buzzed. The next moment, a dazzling golden light burst out of it. Rumble! A crack spread out from the ground and rose from the ground. Bam! 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 One sword beam after another exploded in the void. Fang Wuji's expression changed dramatically. He found that the Crown Prince's knife had actually cut all his sword beams in half. So strong. With a flip of his hand, Fang Wuji threw out 10,000 swords at the same time. I only need one knife to defeat you, the Crown Prince said. The law of space and the law of destruction wrapped around the dragon knife. Bam! A saber shadow swept out and collided with Fang Wuji, who was in the void. It was like a collision of stars. A terrible rumble swept out in all directions. It's over. In the distance, Tai Fei said lightly. The pupils of the experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty constricted. They saw Fang Wuji fly backward in midair, coughing up blood and his face slightly pale. The sword in his hand had actually cracked open in this moment. He could suppress the heir of the Luo family with his sword, but in the face of the Crown Prince, it was almost broken. Is this the power of the Crown Prince? Fang Wuji fell into the void, his hand holding the sword trembling. A look of fear and dejection appeared on his face. Holding the dragon knife, the Crown Prince stood in midair. He breathed a sigh of relief. His face was indifferent. If it weren't for the disappearance of the dragon's soul in the knife would have been enough to cut Fang Wuji's sword in half. The experts of the immortal spirit divine dynasty were a little disappointed. Fang Wuji had been defeated twice in a row. This was undoubtedly a great blow to his temperament. It was a pity that the Crown Prince of the immortal spirit divine dynasty didn't make a move. Otherwise, he could still fight the Crown Prince. The experts of the Xiai divine dynasty, who were watching the battle in secret, all clenched their fists with excitement on their faces. Even though the Crown Prince had been defeated by Bufang, however, the Crown Prince was, after all, the Crown Prince. He had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, and his strength was outstanding among his peers. This battle could be considered as a way to vent the anger of the younger generation of the Xiai divine dynasty. It also ignited a flame in the Crown Prince's heart. Holding the dragon knife, he turned abruptly. His eyes shone like torches. His fighting spirit soared, and he went straight into the restaurant. However, the moment he turned in the distance, in the direction where the geniuses of the Titan divine dynasty were, suddenly, a beam of light soared into the sky. A thin young man entered the restaurant, laughing. The Crown Prince of the Xiai divine dynasty. I'm Tai Fei of the Titan divine dynasty. Please enlighten me. His voice seemed to turn into a bestial roar, shaking heaven and earth. It sounded like thunder and the sky was roaring. The Crown Prince turned abruptly. A terrible aura kept pressing at him, blowing at his hair. Roar. The Titan divine dynasty was the most belligerent of the three divine dynasties. Their imperial family was the Titan divine clan. They were born with divine strength, and their strength was very terrifying. Tai Fei entered the restaurant. Suddenly, he grabbed the bone axe on his back. Then, he swung it down toward the Crown Prince. That axe looked ordinary, as if it did not contain any power. However, at that moment, the axe attracted everyone's attention. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air as they were attracted by this axe. The axe drew a beautiful arc in the air and slashed toward the Crown Prince's position. This was the first time Tai Fei had wielded an axe so far. The experts of the Xiai Divine Dynasty, the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty, and the Titan Divine Dynasty were all watching. Bufang pulled up a chair and sat at the entrance of the restaurant. He watched the battle with great interest. Then, he saw Tai Fei's axe slash toward the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince felt the pressure. Tai Fei's axe might look ordinary, but in fact, it contained the profound power of laws. But, in reality, it contained the profound power of laws. There were also many other laws. So many laws were combined together. It fell from the sky. It seemed to be splitting the sky. The Crown Prince sucked in a cold breath. The Crown Prince sucked in a cold breath. He turned around and unsheathed his saber, slashing it at the axe that was falling down. As the Crown Prince, he was not afraid of the Titan barbarian. Bam! The bone axe collided with the dragon knife. Instantly, the sound of the collision shook heaven and earth. A figure was pushed back from the point of collision. Everyone sucked in a cold breath, because the one who was pushed back was the Crown Prince. In midair, a thin young man was holding a bone axe, his eyes bright like torches. There seemed to be a giant ape roaring behind him. Then, he cast his gaze straight toward the restaurant. He had defeated the Crown Prince with one axe strike. Tai Fei didn't seem satisfied. His target was Bufang, who was sitting in the shade in front of the restaurant. He raised his chin and smiled provocatively. Chapter 1493. Tai Fei was very proud. Perhaps this was the common failing of all geniuses. He knew that the Xiai Divine Dynasty's Crown Prince had been defeated by a chef, and this chef was undoubtedly the one sitting in the chair in front of him, watching the show. Since he could defeat the Crown Prince, he must have some tricks up his sleeve. Tai Fei was warlike, and he had perfectly inherited the warlike genes of the Titan gods. Since he was going to fight, he naturally wanted to fight all the geniuses of the Xiai Divine Dynasty. The Crown Prince had been defeated, and he no longer took him seriously. So, he set his eyes on Bufang. He wanted to fight this chef. The Crown Prince took a few steps back. His expression changed slightly. He had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, and with the dragon soul knife in hand, he couldn't withstand this guy's axe. The skin between his thumb and forefinger was torn, and blood was dripping from it. The Crown Prince's face was very serious. Tai Fei of the Titan Divine Dynasty is indeed a little fierce. Compared with Fang Wuji, Tai Fei was stronger because he had comprehended the supreme laws of the universe. More importantly, he was born with divine strength. Just like Fang Wuji, Tai Fei had comprehended many laws. The realm of a god was a realm in which one comprehended the laws, and the strength of one's strength was determined by how many laws one comprehended. Tai Fei's aura was ferocious, and a giant ape was roaring behind him. He had heard that the Titan gods had the bloodline of the divine ape. Now, it seemed that it was not a rumor. The Crown Prince of the Xiai Divine Dynasty is just SOSO. Tai Fei smiled faintly. Holding the axe, he ignored the Crown Prince and rested his provocative gaze on Bufang. The Crown Prince was nothing to fear, but Bufang, who could defeat him, had become his interest. He had come to the Xiai Divine Dynasty to challenge all the geniuses there. He was already at the peak of the Titan Divine Dynasty, and apart from the Crown Prince, he was the strongest expert of the younger generation. He needed to seek a breakthrough, and the only way was to get enough pressure. He could feel that he was about to break through the limit of the demigod realm and become a god, and the only thing he lacked now was pressure. As long as the pressure was enough, he would be able to break through the limit. Sitting in front of the restaurant, Bufang was a little stunned. "Is this guy provoking me?" He was just a bystander. Bufang was speechless and pursed his lips. Since there was nothing to see, he would pack his things and go back to sleep. Bufang shrugged, stood up, picked up the chair, and walked into the restaurant. With a bang, he shut the restaurant's door tightly. Tai Fei's expression was slightly awkward. Was he being ignored? His provocative expression was already so obvious. Under normal circumstances, shouldn't this chef fight him for the dignity of an expert? Why didn't this chef play by the rules? Tai Fei looked at the Crown Prince, then at the restaurant. The Crown Prince shrugged expressionlessly. He felt somewhat anxious. Tai Fei was very strong, and even he, who had comprehended two supreme laws of the universe, might not be able to defeat him. It was mainly because of Tai Fei's innate divine strength and the many laws he had comprehended. The Crown Prince exhaled deeply. No wonder his father said that there was always someone better. He had thought that Bufang was already an exception in this world. Now, it seemed that he was still a frog at the bottom of a well. The world was so big, and it was very possible for a few geniuses to emerge. He put away the dragon knife. The Crown Prince shook his head. Then, he snapped his fingers. Immediately, a luxurious warship flew over. He got into it and left in front of everyone's eyes. Tai Fei froze in midair, holding the axe. Was I ignored again? The fight is not over yet. However, the Crown Prince had left. Tai Fei's target was now Bufang. The chef in this restaurant was his target. Since this chef had defeated the Crown Prince, as long as he defeated this chef, it would mean that he had suppressed all the geniuses of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. At the thought of this, Tai Fei perked up. In that case, let's do it. Isn't he hiding in the restaurant? Then I'll smash this restaurant open. I don't believe this chef will always be a coward. Rumble. Tai Fei focused his eyes. The next moment, his aura began to climb. He grabbed the axe with both hands. Dark clouds seemed to be gathering in the sky. Buzz, the law of destruction, wrapped around his axe, and a terrible aura spread, shaking the void. The void in front of the axe kept cracking. What is he doing? Is he crazy? Does he want to open a restaurant? This is too much. After all, this is the capital of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. How can he do whatever he wants? The surrounding experts were all stunned. Then, they all revealed sullen expressions. They never thought that Tai Fei would go to such extremes. Sure enough, the people of the Titan divine dynasty are a bunch of barbarians who only know how to fight. Such a move will surely attract the attention of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty's guards. Many people were watching closely. Rumble. In the sky, Black Armor frowned as he looked at the man standing in front of him. He was an expert of the Titan divine dynasty, a mid-grade god king. His aura was so strong that it seemed to be even stronger than his own. Your Excellency, you've gone too far. This is the Xiaoyi divine dynasty, not your Titan divine dynasty. You can't do whatever you want here, Black Armor said coldly. Behind him, many of the black-armored guards had drawn their weapons. A sharp aura filled the sky, and a clanging sound rang out incessantly. It seemed that a shocking collision was about to take place. It's just a small fight between the juniors. Don't be nervous, the Titan Divine Dynasty's mid-grade god king chuckled. However, he didn't dodge at all, which made Black Armor's face grow even more unsightly. A small fight? He's going to split a commercial building in the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty's capital with one blow. For the Divine Dynasty, it will cause great panic and economic losses. He, Black Armor, naturally would not allow such a thing to happen. Down below, many experts felt a trace of strangeness. Up until now, the Divine Dynasty's guards had not shown up, which was somewhat intriguing. Tai Fei's eyes shone brightly. He let out a long roar. His aura reached its peak. It was as if a giant ape was holding an axe and hacking it down toward the restaurant, trying to split it in half. The terrible axe energy spread for 30,000 miles. If the axe hit the building would collapse, and the Divine Dynasty's capital would suffer a heavy loss. At this moment, everyone's expression changed. This is too much. The restaurant's door was closed. Tai Fei narrowed his eyes as he looked at the closed door. Then, he let out a long roar. "Come out!" he bellowed. It sounded like the roar of a giant ape. Accompanied by the shadow of an axe, the terrible axe slashed down from the sky. "Cower? I'll make you cower." Tai Fei's eyes gleamed with a crazy smile. He was so crazy. This was the unique quality of the Titan Divine clan. "Since you don't want to fight, you can die." Inside the restaurant, Bu Fong could sense the terrible blow coming from outside. He couldn't help but furrow his brows as if he was a little angry. The pressure from the opposite side made Bu Fong slightly angry. "Lord Go, let me borrow your bone." Bu Fong turned his eyes and rested them on Lord Go, who was sleeping soundly under the path understanding tree. Lord Go opened his sleepy eyes and froze slightly. He didn't seem to understand what Bu Fong was going to do. Then, he saw Bu Fong carrying the Heaven God's bone and opening the restaurant's door with a bang. This Bu Fong boy must be coveting Lord Go's Heaven God's bone. Lord Go rolled his eyes. The restaurant's door opened. Tai Fei's eyes shone brightly. He let out a long howl. The axe slashed down, trying to kill Bu Fong with one blow. "He's out. He's really out. He has to come out or the restaurant will be cut in half. The people of the Titan Divine Dynasty have gone too far." The experts of the Xiai Divine Dynasty were a little indignant. However, they still widened their eyes and watched the battle in the restaurant. Bu Fong came out with a dog bone in his hand. Everyone's expression suddenly became very strange. A dog bone? Many people remembered the scene when the dog smashed Black, who was close to a high-grade god king, to death with a dog bone in his hand. They immediately observed a moment of silence for Tai Fei. They had almost forgotten that there was a big shot in the restaurant. "A bone?" Tai Fei sneered. "No matter what kind of bone you are, it's all trash under my Titan Divine axe. Die!" Tai Fei roared. Holding the bone, Bu Fong rose into the sky step by step. He took his time. The shadow of the axe fell, blowing his hair and causing it to flutter unceasingly. Then, Bu Fong raised the bone and gently swept it out, colliding with the shadow of the axe. There was no terrible rumble, no clanging sound. There was only a creak that sounded like glass breaking. The axe, which seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth, slowly crumbled in front of the bone. Tai Fei froze. The experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty froze. So did the experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. Fong Wuji sucked in a cold breath. "Is this chef really so strong? How is this possible?" Tai Fei's pupils constricted as he came to his senses. "I heard you were looking for me?" An indifferent voice rang out. Tai Fei looked up and saw Bu Fong's expressionless face. He shuddered inexplicably. "Fight!" Tai Fei roared. Blue veins seemed to bulge on his naked upper body. However, in the face of Tai Fei's roar, Bu Fong raised the bone and smashed it down. Bam! Tai Fei let out a miserable howl. The defense that he was so proud of was completely shattered by this one bone. He hurriedly raised his hand to block it. Bam! However, another bone smashed down. Tai Fei's expression changed dramatically. Why did this bone ignore his defense? Bam! 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 Bu Fong's face was expressionless as he kept smashing the bone down. He looked like a parent who was teaching a child a lesson. "Hit the legs! Hit the chest! Hit the buttocks!" shouted Bu Fong. Tai Fei instinctively tried to block, but every time he tried, he was hit by the bone. You, Tai Fei was furious. Why was there such a crushing defeat? He was the second strongest person among the younger generation of the Titan Divine Dynasty. He could not be defeated. Only the Crown Prince of the Titan Divine Dynasty could defeat him. "I don't accept this," Tai Fei roared. Bam! The next moment, the bone smashed him in the face. Tai Fei was stunned. He covered his face with one hand, tears welling up in his eyes. His body was covered with black and blue bruises, and he looked very miserable. He was about to fight a fierce battle, so why was he being beaten like this? It was as if he was being chased and beaten by his father. I still don't accept this. Tai Fei bellowed, grabbing the axe and swinging it. Bam! The heaven god's bone hit his arm, causing him to feel pain. In the sky, like a stray dog, he was chased and beaten by Bufang with the heaven god's bone in his hand. Bufang was also surprised. This heaven god's bone is really a good thing. It feels so good to chase someone and beat them. In the sky, the expression of the mid-grade god king, who had stopped black armor, flickered. He looked down and saw Tai Fei, who was being chased like a dog. What's going on? The Titan Divine Dynasty's expert was dumbfounded. Tai Fei was a genius, but he was actually being beaten by a member of the younger generation? Behind him, black armor immediately wore a satisfied expression. He naturally recognized the heaven god's bone in Bufang's hand. It belonged to the genius black dog. He's indeed worthy of being the man His Majesty values. He didn't bring shame to the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty. Tai Fei cried. He was really crying. Every time the bone hit him, he felt a pain that went deep into his bones. It made his nose sting and he couldn't help crying. Stop! In the sky, the mid-grade god king of the Titan Divine Dynasty sped over. A terrible aura spread. The mid-grade god king locked onto Bufang. When his eyes fell on the bone in Bufang's hand, his pupils constricted. The next moment, greed exploded out of him. A heaven god's bone? It's actually a heaven god's bone. Chapter 1494. A heaven god's bone. Good heavens! It's actually a heaven god's bone. No wonder Tai Fei was being crushed. With a heaven god's bone, one could basically ignore the power of laws. Even if Tai Fei had the heaven god's divine power, he could not use it, unless he could completely crush it with great power. The mid-grade god king of the Titan Divine Dynasty showed a strong look of greed. He wanted to strike immediately and snatch the heaven god's bone. But he was not a fool. Even in the Titan Divine Dynasty's capital, he did not dare to snatch the heaven god's bones so blatantly. Even though the Xiaoyi Divine Emperor was in his twilight years, he was not someone he could afford to offend. If the Divine Emperor wanted to kill him, he could do so with one finger. So, he put away his greed. However, he still glanced at the heaven god's bone in Bufang's hand from time to time. Even a god king would covet such a treasure. Tai Fei burst into tears, and his eyes were filled with deep sadness. He had never imagined that he would be crushed in such a manner. A heaven god's bone. This guy actually has a heaven god's bone. Since the mid-grade god king had made a move, Bufang stopped. Although he felt a little regretful, the feeling of fighting back was really good. The geniuses of the Titan Divine Dynasty and the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty were dumbfounded. Never had they imagined that this battle would actually end in such a comical manner. I must find a chance to snatch the heaven god's bone. The Titan Divine Dynasty's god king's eyes flashed, but he was calculating in his mind. Black armor arrived. The Titan Divine Dynasty's god king naturally would not do anything drastic. He took Tai Fei and the others and left the place. Of course, before he left, he gave Bufang and the restaurant a deep look. The people around the restaurant dispersed. Bufang returned to the restaurant with the bone in his hand, feeling like he hadn't had enough. He reluctantly returned the bone to the Lord Go. The Lord Go rolled his eyes. Sure enough, Bufang boy is really coveting the heaven god's bone in my hand. It's useless for you to covet it. Without the heaven god's bone's approval, you can't use its power. If you could, that little fellow would have exploded when you stabbed the bone just now, the Lord Go said. The Lord Go said. Bufang also understood that he could only satisfy his craving. After all, the heavenly god's bone belonged to the Lord Go. Lord Go carried the heavenly god's bone on his back again and yawned. Bufang boy, Lord Go, it's about time for me to return to the ruins. Back to the ruins? Bufang was taken aback. There are many good things in the ancient heaven god's ruins. Lord Go, I still need to go there. Lord Go suggests that you, kid, go there when you have the time. Lord Go continued to yawn, and the fat on his face trembled. Bufang muttered to himself. He really hadn't been to the ancient heavenly god's ruins, so he could give it a try. However, Bufang was afraid of trouble. It was more comfortable to bask in the sun in the restaurant. In addition, the creature who attacked us has also appeared in the ruins. I, Lord Go, must go and get revenge. I, Lord Go, have never suffered such a big loss in my life except for the heavenly path. Lord Go's eyes narrowed, gleaming brightly. Bufang nodded. At the thought of that creature, his face grew serious. A creature that could make the Divine Emperor feel serious was naturally extraordinary, so he didn't dare to slight it. He had told the Divine Emperor about the creature's origin, but the Divine Emperor couldn't figure out what it was. It had destroyed a third-class small world and even killed a god king in the ancient heaven god's ruins. This creature seemed to be growing more and more terrifying. The news of the heaven god's bone in the mysterious restaurant spread among the emissaries. Whether it was the immortal spirit divine dynasty or the Titan divine dynasty, they were all stimulated by the news. They couldn't wait to attack immediately. However, when they thought that this was the Xiaoyi divine dynasty, they restrained themselves a lot. However, all the emissaries seemed to be plotting something. Of course, they would not give up the heaven god's bone so easily. Such a lost piece of bone was like a huge fragrant steamed bun, attracting countless people. It should be noted that every divine dynasty had an ancient heaven god's relic. However, the number of heaven god's bones in them was limited. If they could get a piece of heaven god's bone from the Xiaoyi divine dynasty, it would be a big deal. For the other divine dynasties, it was a way to enhance their national strength. It was late at night. The long street was brightly lit. Outside the Luo family's skyscraper, there were several figures standing there. They were all experts of the Titan divine dynasty, and they coveted the heaven god's bone. Naturally, they would not let go of this opportunity. Since they couldn't do it in the open, they would do it in the dark. In any case, the Xiaoyi divine dynasty's divine emperor was in his twilight years. Even if he knew the news, he wouldn't dare to go to war with the Titan divine dynasty. The Titan divine dynasty was belligerent, and perhaps they had been looking forward to this battle for a long time. The mid-grade god of the Titan divine dynasty had a grave look on his face, and his eyes were bursting with greed. Keep a lookout for me outside the restaurant. If the Xiaoyi divine dynasty's guards appear, stop them immediately. It will only take a moment for me to escape. If they can't get hold of me, they won't be able to get the heaven god's bone back. The mid-grade god king said to the few god kings around him. He had informed the high-grade god king of the emissary group about this, and the latter was very supportive of their actions. So, he was very confident in this matter. The god kings around him nodded, shook their bodies, and then hid in the void. The surrounding heaven and earth were sealed off. In the distance, the god kings of the immortal spirit divine dynasty narrowed their eyes. As they sensed the changes in the void, they all became vigilant. The Titan divine dynasty has made its move. Let's stay put and act according to circumstances. A heavenly god's bone that's exposed to the outside world is an opportunity. The heaven god's bone that is not in the divine emperor's hands is our opportunity. The immortal spirit divine dynasty's experts said. The divine emperor had ordered that the passage to the ancient heaven god's relic would be open tomorrow. Therefore, if they wanted to make a move, they had to do it today. Once they entered the relic, they would lose the chance to make a move. Buzz, the surroundings of the Luo family's skyscraper were sealed off. The expression of the perfected God in charge of the building changed abruptly. He sucked in a cold breath. In the perception of his divine sense, he sensed a terrible aura that made him shudder like a cicada in winter. What happened? Rumble. A terrible aura erupted. The perfected God didn't dare to move at all. Swoosh. The sound of something piercing through the air rang out. The surrounding void was sealed off. The God King of the Titan Divine Dynasty stepped on the wall of the building, flew up and rushed to the top floor. Before long, he came in front of the transparent glass of the restaurant. His eyes were fixed on the quiet interior of the restaurant. The Heaven God's bone is in this restaurant. The corners of the mid-grade God King's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a touch of excitement. He had checked the information before he came here. There were no God Kings in this restaurant. There was only a black dog with the strength of a high-grade god, who once killed a mid-grade God King with the Heaven God's bone. However, that was with the help of the Heaven God's bone. And this time, the high-grade God King of the emissary group had provided him with a barbarian mark that could temporarily seal the power of the Heaven God's bone. If the Heaven God's bone lost its power, what could a mere high-grade god black dog and a demigod genius do to him? The mid-grade God King's eyes glowed with fire. The next moment, he raised his fist. Then, he punched the glass. Heaven God's bone, here I come. The God King roared inwardly. Wrapped in great force, his fist smashed hard on the restaurant's glass. A loud bang rang out. The whole glass trembled violently. Then, it remained unscathed. The God King. It didn't break? Did I make a mistake? His fist could break mountains, so how could it not break the glass of a restaurant? No, let's do it again. The God King took a deep breath. His fist was wrapped in divine power. He threw a punch. A hole seemed to be punched through the void. Bam! The fist hit the glass again. The atmosphere was a little awkward. The God King cleared his throat. Looking at the smooth and flawless glass, the corner of his mouth twitched. He rolled to his feet. He landed on the roof of the building. I'd better break in. When he reached the door, he raised his hand and pressed it. A creak rang out. The restaurant's door slowly opened. Compared with the indestructible glass, this door was a little different. However, the mid-grade God King didn't think too much. He stepped into the restaurant. He was very confident. He was determined to get the Heaven God's bone. What he was afraid of now was the Shui Divine Dynasty's guards stopping him. The restaurant was a little dark. The God King stepped into it and glanced around. There were tables, counters, walls, trees, and the dog under the trees. Oh, a dog. On the dog's back was a sparkling, flawless white bone. It was the Heaven God's bone he had seen during the day. This God King's breathing became ragged. The Heaven God's bone. It's really the Heaven God's bone. The God King's mind stirred. A terrifying aura spread out as it flew towards the location of the black dog. Suddenly, in the dark night, a beam of light burst forth. Troublemaker! You will be stripped as an example to others. A mechanical voice rang out in the dark night, making one's hair stand on end. The God King turned his head and saw an iron puppet staring at him. Just a mere puppet, the God King curled his lips in disdain. The puppet flew toward him. The God King raised his hand. Divine power surged, turning his palm a little glassy. Soon, however, his expression changed. The reason for that was because when his palm strike landed on the puppet's body, it was actually shattered. The scene stunned the God King. Rumble! With a backhand, Xiao Bai slapped the God King in the face, knocking him back a few steps. What the hell? This puppet is immune to my divine power and laws. He was a mid-grade God King who had comprehended nearly 400 laws. In the restaurant, Xiao Bai could be immune to the power of laws. It was a freakish ability. However, in addition to the power of laws, the Titan gods also had a natural advantage in strength. Soon, the mid-grade God King used his strength to force Xiao Bai under him. Click. The restaurant's lights came on. At the kitchen door, a thin figure leaned against the door, looking at the mid-grade god king with a straight face. "What are you doing?" Bufang said. When the god king saw Bufang, his eyes narrowed. "Hand over the heaven god's bone, and I'll spare your life." The aura of this god king erupted. A terrifying aura distorted the void. He stared at Bufang, his eyes full of greed. Tap, tap. Upstairs, the sound of footsteps rang out. Then, you and Hades' era went downstairs. When they saw the god king, they looked surprised. Hades' era covered his mouth with a hand, looking incredulous. Heavens! Someone came to steal the mangy dog's bone in the middle of the night? Bufang, young man, do you need I to do it? This one is stronger. I might need 4 hours to kill him. Hades' era said. Bufang glanced at Hades' era with a strange expression and shook his head. Then, he raised a hand and pointed behind the god king. By the time you kill him, it will be dawn. In the direction Bufang pointed, Lord Go was holding the heaven god's bone with one paw and looking sideways at the mid-grade god king. A gentle and magnetic voice rang out in the restaurant. I heard someone wants to steal Lord Go's bone. Chapter 1495. Snatching a bone, and a dog's bone at that, to a dog, a bone was no less important than a human's clothes. This was like trying to strip the Lord Go's clothes. It was simply intolerable. A black dog. At this moment, the god king's hair stood on end, and all his hair seemed to stand on end. It was an emotion that spread in an instant, making his heart skip a beat. In that instant, the godly monarch's movements were smooth and fluid. He turned, threw out a punch, and the power of law surged. He had already investigated this black dog before he came here. Although its strength was nothing to be afraid of, with the heaven god's bone, it was extremely terrifying. Previously, this black dog had killed a mid-grade god king who had comprehended nearly 500 laws with a single blow. Therefore, although this god king was confident, he was still very vigilant. The punch seemed to set off a thunderbolt, and the billowing airwaves seemed to blast the air apart. It was indeed at the level of a mid-grade god king. A terrible momentum washed over the Lord Go like a raging wave, trying to completely overturn him. However, it was difficult for such an imposing aura to spread in the restaurant. The mid-grade god king's expression finally changed. He understood the strangeness of this restaurant. If it were a normal restaurant, his punch would have been enough to completely blow it up. A faint snort rang out. It was accompanied by a haughty snort. The next moment, he threw out a bone that was as clear as white jade. It collided with the god king's fist. Crack! A crisp sound rang out. The god king immediately howled out miserably. He actually retreated as his face suddenly paled. Bam! Like a cannonball, the god king shot out in a flash. He slammed it on the table of the restaurant. The table did not budge. This restaurant. The corner of the god king's mouth twitched violently. He felt as if he had fallen into a deep pit, and it would be difficult for him to climb out. The heaven god's bone and the mysterious restaurant. There's something strange about this restaurant. The god king rolled over and rose to his feet. This place is full of mysteries. I can't stay here any longer. I'll take the heaven god's bone and leave as soon as possible. The god king's heart skipped a beat and his eyes narrowed. In the next moment, the aura on his body began to rise, and the runes on his body seemed to be pulsating. This was a technique of the Titan gods. They called the words drawn on their bodies barbaric text. These barbaric glyphs could provide them with unparalleled power. Boom! It was as if a flame was burning. The god king of the Titan divine dynasty seemed to have become a different person, and his eyes were bright. He took a step forward and shot toward the Lord Go. Tens of thousands of laws filled the air, and law runes wrapped around his body. He forced the Lord Go with one move. The long roar was deafening. All of a sudden, the sound traveled out of the building. Outside the building, the eyes of the waiting God Kings narrowed. Had it begun? They glanced around warily, their auras fluctuating as they sealed off this part of the world to prevent the Xiai Divine Dynasty's God Kings from intervening. This was the most dangerous thing the Titan Divine Dynasty had ever done in the Xiai Divine Dynasty. This kind of matter had to be settled quickly. If the Divine Emperor found out, they would be in the wrong. Now, they could only hope that the mid-grade God King in the restaurant would be faster. Of course, they were also very confident in the God King. After all, he had the barbaric glyphs given to him by a high-grade god. That kind of barbaric glyphs could temporarily suppress the heaven god's bones immunity. The restaurant kept rumbling. The atmosphere couldn't help but become tense. Inside the restaurant, the barbaric glyphs erupted from the mid-grade God King's body as he rushed toward the Lord Go. This time, he was confident that he would not be knocked away by the heaven god's bone again. That was because he had used the barbaric glyphs that suppressed the heaven god's bone's power. Hand over the heaven god's bone. The mid-grade God King's eyes turned red, and his body moved like lightning. A terrible aura shook the void. The Lord Go narrowed his eyes slightly. Holding the heaven god's bone, he threw it at the God King who was coming at him. The restaurant was not large. The God King's figure was almost teleporting, flashing and flashing. It's useless. I know the heaven god's bone is very scary. But since I know it, how dare I come here and rob it? I have the barbaric glyphs. I'm invincible. The mid-grade God King almost burst out laughing. His body burst into a dazzling light, which was as dazzling as the sun. The barbaric glyphs on it burst into brilliant light. With a bang, he caught the heaven god's bone with his bare hands. The power of the law erupted from it. The Lord Go was slightly taken aback. In the distance, Bufang and Hades' Era were also stunned. It seemed that he had come prepared. The power of the law rippled. The power of the heaven god's bone was actually suppressed? It was suppressed. The God King of the Titan Divine Dynasty laughed excitedly. He made a move in an instant, grabbing the heaven god's bone. The power of the law erupted as he exerted force, trying to pull it out of the Lord Go's claws. He exerted force. He yanked it hard. It didn't budge. It didn't budge at all. How was that possible? The God King frowned and stared coldly at the Lord Go. He growled, "Let go of it." The God King's aura fluctuated. He didn't want to waste time with this black dog. Once the Divine Emperor made a move, he really couldn't get the heaven god's bone. The power of the law erupted. More than 300 laws swirled wildly. The void seemed a little overwhelmed and was about to collapse. The Lord Go stared at the God King with his dog eyes. Suddenly, the Lord Go smiled. The corners of the dog's mouth curved upward slightly, and a mocking look appeared on his face. It was a blatant mockery. What the hell? The God King was stunned. The next moment, his pupils constricted. His body seemed to be frozen, motionless. The black dog raised its exquisite paw and waved it in front of his eyes. With a puff, it slapped him in the face. His skin and flesh sank deeply. This is, the flow of time returned to normal. The God King suddenly felt a stabbing pain in his mind. Bam! The God King was sent flying away in an instant. With a bang, he flew out of the restaurant's door and out of the door. He tumbled continuously in the air. Carrying the heaven god's bone, the Lord Go walked out of the restaurant with his elegant cat-like steps. Before long, he was hovering in midair. He looked indifferently at the God King in the distance, whose face was covered with blood. Around the building, the experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty were all stunned. What's going on? They actually failed? A mid-grade God King, who possessed the barbaric glyphs bestowed by a high-grade God King, was knocked flying out of the restaurant? Oh, you came in a group. The Lord Go raised his dog eyes slightly, glanced at the people around him, and smiled faintly. His gentle and magnetic voice resounded through the void. The God King was covered with blood. His face was deeply sunken and twisted, and there was a deep paw print on it. His anger was burning like fire. His chest seemed to be about to explode. "Let's go together. Let's kill this dog once and for all," the mid-grade God King growled. The eyes of the surrounding Titan Divine Dynasty's experts focused as well. The God King was right. They had to attack together and could not delay any longer. If they did, it was very likely to attract the attention of the Xiai Divine Dynasty's Divine Emperor. Fight. The eyes of the God Kings lit up. Their main responsibility for this trip was to protect the genius, but they would not give up if they could get the Heaven God's bone. Long roars rose into the sky. Wisps of the power of law filled the void. It was as if the surrounding void was boiling. Low-grade God Kings and mid-grade God Kings attacked at the same time. It was a shocking scene. If anyone saw it, they would be petrified. With so many God Kings attacking at the same time, even the battle between the Imperial Concubine and the Divine Chef Temple was not as terrifying as this. Bam! Bam! The void around the restaurant kept cracking and exploding. In the capital of the Divine Dynasty, the sound of something piercing through the air rang out. Black Armor and his guards arrived one after another. They sped over at high speed and looked extremely serious. The experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty are so bold. I can't believe they actually dare to cause trouble in the Divine Dynasty's capital. This is unforgivable. Outside the Luo family's skyscraper, the barbaric glyphs had sealed off the void, making it a little blurry. Outside, one warship after another streaked across the sky. The experts of the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty were spying on them. The experts of the Xiai Divine Dynasty had surrounded them. King Pingyang, King Tianlong, the heads of the Luo family, and the Zhao family, all the experts descended, their faces gloomy. I can't believe the experts of the Titan Divine Dynasty really dare to attack in the Xiai Divine Dynasty's territory. They really don't take the Xiai Divine Dynasty seriously. The barbaric glyphs floated in the air. Black Armor hovered outside, his face cold and gloomy. He raised a hand and punched the glyph. The void trembled. Feeling a powerful sealing intent. He felt a powerful sealing intent. "How dare you!" Black Armor was furious. This was trespassing on the Xiai Divine Dynasty's territory. How dare they set up a seal in the Divine Dynasty's capital like this? Boom! 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 Inside the seal, a terrible battle broke out. Rumbling sounds rang out incessantly. One God King after another attacked frantically. They knew they had no way out. The mid-grade God Kings and low-grade God Kings unleashed their full power. The terrible power of law seemed to form an ocean. Lord Go was like a small boat in the ocean, about to be capsized in an instant. "You're robbing a bone, and you're doing it with such great fanfare." Lord Go took a deep breath. The next moment, his body grew larger. Pitch-black hellfire spread around his body, distorting the void. Blood-colored patterns emerged and wrapped around the Heaven God's bone. 3 heads emerged. Each of them was bursting with a terrible aura. The 3 dog heads opened their mouths at the same time. At the same time, they barked. Woof! Their barks shook the void, causing it to explode. The terrible law of time filled the air. At this moment, the flowing sea of law came to a standstill. All the God Kings focused their eyes. The law of time. Suddenly, a bone fell to the ground. Bam! A low-grade God King's head suddenly exploded. With a bang, blood spurted out. The power of law in his body exploded in an instant. Like a peerless savage beast, Lord Go rushed into the group of God Kings with great terror and began a massacre. Naturally, the low-grade God Kings could not withstand a single blow from Lord Go. After all, he was a heaven-defying dog who had comprehended the law of time. However, the mid-grade God Kings could withstand it. Bam! However, when the Heaven God's bone hit them, they howled miserably. Their bones broke, and their blood splattered across the sky. The god kings of the Titan divine dynasty all looked horrified. They were puzzled and puzzled. Why couldn't he suppress this black dog with the barbaric glyphs bestowed by a high-grade god king? He was just a black dog that was only a high-grade god. However, the law of time and the heaven god's bone seemed to have undergone a qualitative change. This was a peerless, fierce dog. In the restaurant, Bu Fang's eyes lit up. His mind surged as he sensed the laws drifting all over the sky. He stretched out his hand, and a ball of silver flames suddenly burned in his palm. He flicked his finger. The divine flame darted out, turned into a stream of light, and shot out. In an instant, countless laws were absorbed by the flame. Like a whale, the souls of the god kings killed by Lord Go with the heaven god's bone were devoured, but their fleshly bodies and laws were powerless to spread. In Bu Fang's view, these were all resources. Lord Go was on a rampage, while Bu Fang was taking advantage of the situation. This time, his divine flame should be much stronger. When he became a god, its power would surely shake heaven and earth. Crack, crack, cracks appeared on the barbaric glyphs that sealed the void. Black armor focused his eyes. He let out a long roar. Then, he threw a punch at the seal. The sturdy barbaric glyph's seal was instantly smashed by the punch, turning into specks of light that filled the sky and dissipating. However, he smashed the barbaric text seal. Black armor's eyes narrowed, and he sucked in a cold breath. A strong smell of blood filled the air. Countless laws floated around the restaurant, and a silver flame chased after and devoured them. Among them, the corpses of several god kings floated weakly. The blood of several mid-grade god kings splashed across the sky like dead dogs. A pair of eyes swept over. Black armor's heart skipped a beat. In the distant sky, a violent three-headed black dog was holding a heaven god's bone with blood-colored patterns and staring at him with a grin. Terrifying. Very terrifying. Black armor's heart seemed to clench at this moment. Boom. In the direction of the residence of the Titan Divine Dynasty's emissary group in the capital of the Divine Dynasty, a terrible aura soared into the sky, filled with infinite shock and anger. How dare you, black dog! How dare you kill the god kings of the Titan Divine Dynasty? Give me your dog life. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.